Hey guys, welcome to Fanfic Fanatics. So in today's video we are gonna see, what if Deku was werewolf and had harem? Before starting, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you are interested in MHA fanfictions. This story is MHA, Feral Impulses by LOSGHOST 10. Now without wasting any more time, let's dive in Fake City Gamma, in late November. The sounds of panting could be heard in the deserted streets of the fake city, which was property of UA. Standing shakily on the street while sweating profusely was none other than Izuku Midoriya of Class 2A. The 17-year-old was training hard as per usual, trying his best to gain more control over his quirk one for all. To train himself he had been using full cowling for the past 2 hours and just now finally took a break. However, that wasn't the only reason for his training as of late. Being a healthy young male, he had certain cravings like any other, but due to his closed and isolated life, due to being quirkless until barely a year and a half ago, he had bottled it all up and started training hard to burn it off. However, recently it's been different. Something had changed, and for the life of him he couldn't seem to get that strange craving to go away no matter how much he trained himself into the ground. Even now he could feel it gnawing at his mental barriers. Shaking himself from his thoughts, he had his hands on his knees, leaning forward trying to catch his breath. After a couple minutes he had calmed his racing heart and relaxed his breathing. Feeling thirsty, he went over to his water bottle and phone. Grabbing the bottle off the ground, he drank the cold soothing water that moistened his dry throat, after which he turned and picked up his phone to check the time. Izuku let out a grunt. "It's 12 am, I trained for 5 hours on accident, again." He sighed, slightly depressed, and wiped his face with his shirt. He set the phone back down and was about to turn and start doing some kicks, but all of a sudden the world became fuzzy. His vision started to blur and he saw double of everything. Before he could think of what was happening, his entire world turned sideways and he collapsed onto the street floor. Inside one for all, his eyes fluttered open and he groaned with a hoarse voice. Sitting up on shaky hands, he tried his best to stand up but was pushed down by an unknown force on his shoulders. Looking up, he blinked and tried to understand why the hell a woman's breasts were hanging over his head and his face was basically buried into them. His muffled scream of embarrassment rang out, which caused the woman whose breast he was face first in to chuckle heartily at him. "Oh gods, he's a riot. Toshi did a great job in choosing him." "Toshi?" thought Izuku, but then another voice rang out, "Seriously Nana, that's the criteria for a good successor of One for All?" "Not, I don't know. Good muscles for the quirk to work properly and not damage him?" Izuku scrambled and got out from under the breast, jumping away from the woman. In doing so he got a clear look at the two plus the others around them. The woman he was now sure looked like a supermodel cosplaying a hero winked at him, making him blush. But he quickly got over it and he looked over the others, inspecting them head to toe. They were all, besides the one woman, men in various heights and unique personalities. If their clothes were anything to go by, Izuku was unsure if he was in some sort of cosplay dream or something due to how strange this whole situation was. "Who are you people? And where am I?" he asked, still in his fighting stance. For a second he looked away from the group of unknowns to the world around them. It was a sort of void with different colors from blues to purples and deep reds. It was almost hypnotic, but Izuku turned away to look back upon the strangers. The supermodel stood up from her kneeling position where she had given him the famous lap pillow. The MILF giggled and formed a teasing smirk. "Oh my, those are quite the thoughts rushing through your head. I knew young men were full of energy, but those positions you are imagining are some I've never even seen or heard of before." The greenette turned full on red and sputtered out a response. How did you read my thoughts?" The woman giggled again. "Well, to put it simply, were." The tall, bald-headed man cut her off with a boisterous voice. "You're inside One for All, kid. Pretty snazzy place, huh?" The man got a good heavy smack to the back of his head from the woman. "Damn it, Banjo, don't interrupt me." The now known as Banjo growled and punched her in the stomach. "Oh yeah? Well, how about you stop flirting with him like some sort of cradle-robbing skank?" The both immediately started fighting and wrestling on the ground, with the woman dominating the fight with haymakers and elbows to the man's nose and face. Izuku didn't know what to think, in all honesty. At one moment he was training like usual to relieve stress and some of the sexual energy he had been storing all of his life, and the next he's inside of his quirk watching a super sexy woman put a man almost twice her size in a rear naked choke. Yeah, this was the sort of chaos he was far too familiar with. He'd experienced such chaos for the last year and a half with Class 1A turned 2A, and it seems even when he wasn't even around them the chaos followed like a super bad and clingy ex-girlfriend. Sighing and facepalming, he sat down onto the floor and waited for the two to stop their fighting. As he waited, one of the other men came over to him and sat down besides him. Turning to the man, he got a better look at him. The man had a baggy t-shirt with white hair and red eyes and looked sickly skinny. The man glanced at him and smiled. "Hello Ninth, it's nice to meet you. You can refer to me as Yoichi Shigaraki or just Yoichi for short." Izuku nodded and gave Yoichi a handshake. "Nice to meet you, Yoichi-san. Can you explain what's going on as we wait for those two to stop fighting?" Yoichi smiled and gave a brief nod. "Sure thing. Well, this is new for all of us, so this kind of thing has never happened before. It's gonna be more of a theory and our own collective speculation than anything, so take it with a grain of salt." The greenette raised an eyebrow but gestures for him to continue. Yoichi did just that and started explaining. "So the theory we have from inspecting the core of One for All is that it's somehow tapped into your inactive quirk genes. You see, you may have been born quirkless, but you still have the gene in your body and can give it to your children. It's just not active for you." Izuku thought about it, and from the research he did on quirks, everything he was saying made some kind of feasible sense, but that left what the quirk was doing with said genes up to speculation. Yoichi, seeing Izuku turn back to him and waiting for him to continue, did just that. "So as I was saying, we think One for All has used your raw quirk genes to manufacture a brand new quirk to go along with itself. It basically used the raw extra genes as clay and formed it into something usable to help you use One for All at its full capacity." Wait, are you saying I'm getting a new quirk that could have been mine in the first place?" asked Izuku, astonished and very, very confused. The white-haired man chuckled. "No, not exactly. You're getting a quirk, sure, but this one is going to be made from the subconscious of One for All and influenced by your mental and physical needs. It could be anything really. From invulnerability to something like a transformation similar to your predecessor Toshinori's strange buff form. It's rather fascinating, and we the past users have even placed bets on what it'll be for fun." Izuku was sitting with his mouth hanging open in shock. He couldn't believe it. He always wished for a quirk of his own, and even with One for All it just never felt right to him, but this was something out of his wildest dreams. But then he realized what Yoichi said at the end. "Wait a minute, you guys placed bets on what my new quirk is gonna be. Aren't you guys, I don't know, being a little childish?" Yoichi was about to reply, but the masculine voice of Banjo, who was still fighting Nana, spoke up. "Oi, it ain't childish. And besides, I know for a fact it's gonna be something cool like bone claws." Nana slammed his face into the floor and scoffed at him. "No, it's not, you idiot. It's definitely gonna be a healing factor because he breaks his bones all the time." The two started butting heads once again, leaving Izuku to facepalm. He groaned at his predecessors and turned back to Yoichi. "Okay. That being said, can you explain who these other people's names are?" Yoichi smiled brightly. "Well, you already know me, and the second and third don't think you're worthy just yet to know their names, so we'll be skipping over those. That leaves Hikage Shinomori the fourth. You've seen enough of Daigoro Banjo, the one fighting, who is the sixth, and the N with the high collar is the seventh. Besides that is the seventh Nana Shimura, the only female, and of course Toshinori Yagi, who is still alive but is represented as the man in golden flames over there." When Izuku turned to where Yoichi gestured to the flaming man that was supposed to be his mentor, he couldn't help but wonder how he didn't notice him until now. Shrugging mentally, he was about to ask something but felt a pull in the back of his head. It was strange, and Yoichi spoke up. "It seems you're waking up. This may be painful and or a genuinely exhausting process, so make sure to rest up and get your school nurse." Izuku didn't get to reply as his world turned black once again and he soon woke up. City Gamma Street. Our protagonist moaned and groaned in pain as he felt like he had just slept on a rough and uncomfortable street. Oh yeah, that's exactly what he did. Pushing himself up with a huff, he tried standing, finding his muscles were more sore than they should be and he was a little lightheaded. "Griat, I feel like I just went through a meat grinder and there's still a lot of stuff I gotta do today." He moved with slight pain, getting his phone and water bottle before he made his trek back to his dorm. On the way he checked his phone to see it was about 6:36 a.m. At least he still had plenty of time to get ready for school. He was glad he wouldn't be getting yelled at by Aizawa for being late again. As he got closer to the dorm, to where it was just in view, he started feeling a warm sensation in his chest. It wasn't a light chest pain or anything like that, but the discomfort was unlike anything he'd ever felt before. It didn't take that long for him to arrive and enter the building with sweat covering his entire face and felt his hands shake and spasm. His breathing was rough and his eyes begun to sting. It was after his fourth step that he heard a feminine voice to his left. Glancing over he saw Momo Yaoyorozu, the class vice president and most beautiful girl in his class. "I'm sorry Yaoyorozu-san. Could you repeat that? I didn't hear you?" asked Izuku. Momo blinked in surprise and rushed over to him, leaving her romance novel on the coffee table. Izuku absent-mindedly noted it was called Primal Passion, A Forbidden Love. "Oh my. Midoriya-kun, you look terrible. Did you stay out and fall asleep after training again?" asked the brunette. Izuku blushed as she fussed over him and started inspecting him closely. "I'm fine, just a bit of a cold I think." Momo pouted and quickly started dragging him up and towards the elevator. "Then you're going to bed and I'm gonna take your temperature. You don't look so good, so I'll be texting Aizawa that you can't make it today." The young man sighed but nodded. "All right, but seriously, it's probably nothing." The brunette looked at him with a blank stare. "Oh really? The last time you said that very thing, you had broken your arm and 3 ribs. At this point, whenever you say you're all right, fine, or okay, we should expect you to be on the edge of death just in case." He couldn't say against that. He really did have a problem when it came to stopping when his injuries were bad and lying about being okay when he really wasn't. The ding from the elevator indicated they made it to his floor and they made their way over towards his bedroom, but thinking over this caused a thought to appear in his mind. "Wait a minute. I'm about to be with a beautiful girl. Alone. In my room. Without any supervision at all. Oh crap baskets." He started to protest in embarrassment. "Why, you know it's okay, I can take it from here. Don't worry about me, I can." He got interrupted by Momo, who opened his door and walked him in while having her arm wrapped around his own. "No buts, mister. You're sick and need to relax and I'm going to help you. No more complaints or I'll make All Might come and scold you into taking it easy." Izuku sputtered as she pushed him onto the bed and started making a thermometer in her hand using her quirk. Before he could even react, the thermometer was shoved in his mouth and he was pushed to lay down. The two kept silent, staying like this until she took the thermometer out and checked it. From the way her eyebrows shot up, he knew that wasn't a good thing. "Midoriya, I'm going to have recovery girl come over. Just stay there while I go get my phone, okay?" she said before sprinting out the room, not leaving him with a chance to retort. "Okay. That was weird, but not the weirdest reaction I've seen in my life. Although that does make me wonder what was the thermometer reading." He glanced at the said object that Momo had placed down on his desk. Glancing at the door and once more at the object, he sat up and reached over for it, only to feel a tightening in his gums for a moment, and soon they stung like pressure was being put on them from under the teeth themselves. "Ow, ow, ow, son of a All Might, this hurts," he exclaimed on pain. He started getting used to the pain after about a minute as it numbed itself. He could taste blood, but that wasn't his main focus as he grabbed the thermometer quickly and checked it. To his astonishment, he saw it read 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Celsius. 7. Oh. Shit, that's not good, he cursed in worry. It was just then that Momo came in with her phone to her ear and a packet of ice in the other. She was talking to who he knew to be recovery girl from the familiar voice over the phone. "Yes ma'am. I don't know how he's even alive either. Yes ma'am. Yes, I will do that. Okay, see you when you arrive," she responded to the phone. Izuku couldn't help but chuckle. The way her frazzled hair looked made her seem goofy in his light-headed mind, but then he noticed her clothing and blushed. She had been wearing a form-fitting tank top and shorts that did nothing to hide her curves and, dare he say, enchanted the way her legs looked. He honestly didn't know how long he had been staring, but from the way her face turned a deep red and her eyes darting towards him in a way repeatedly, he could put together that he dozed off mentally and had gotten caught. Sorry, you look really pretty," he said in his delirious state. Momo gave a fake cough into her hand while still blushing. "It's fine, Midoriya-kun. There's nothing wrong with you appreciating what you like as long as you don't act like Mineta or Denki." Izuku grimaced at the mention of Mineta and unknowingly let out a small growl that sounded like an animal. Momo didn't seem to notice, so they stayed like this with her checking him repeatedly for the next 10 minutes, waiting for recovery girl to arrive. It was awkward to say the least, as Izuku couldn't help but admire the brunette's beauty all the while she noticed and felt strange about it. It's not like she disliked the way his eyes roamed her body. It was the opposite in fact, but that was the problem she was having. She had known Izuku for over a year now and felt comfortable with him. Heck, she had even admired his body too at some points, but this was the first he did it to her and she didn't know what to feel or how she wanted to feel. Everyone knew Uraraka had basically called dibs on the green-haired boy, but that didn't stop her and a few others from liking what they were seeing when around him. She had even confided about him to her close friend Kyoka, who also had been checking him out quite a lot and came to the conclusion he was a well-sought-after guy. If it wouldn't hurt Uraraka's feelings, then many of them would have taken a crack at him, Momo being included. But the way he was looking at her now made her feel proud, happy, excited, horny, maybe all of the above if she was being honest with herself. But gods, he just didn't stop looking at her, to her neck, to her breast and toned stomach from training as a hero for a year. She could say he apparently really liked her thighs, but the most she seemed to notice him looking at was her eyes. Yup. Her eyes, a place that was not at all sexual in nature, but apparently he liked to stare at them as of right now, and he wasn't gonna stop anytime soon. Knock knock knock. Scratch that. He looked away and towards the door with a deep blush. Dang it, she honestly missed his gaze for some odd reason. Momo got up and went over, opening it, allowing the short elderly woman inside. With her was a few small medical machines she needed for the test she was about to do on the green-haired boy. Hello again, recovery girl. At least I kept my promise and don't have any broken bones this time. Izuku joked half-heartedly. The elderly woman sighed at him but smiled. It's good to see you too, Sonny, but I don't have time to talk. I need you to tell me what happened to make you so sick while I run test. She took out a wrap and placed it on his bicep, letting it inflate to take his blood pressure. As she did that, he begrudgingly explained what he did last night, while also explains how his quirk had done something and made him pass out. The last part made her worry, but the look in his eyes said it needed to stay secret, as it was because of one for all. Thankfully the elderly nurse understood and started asking how he was feeling and what he thought was happening to him. Izuku went on to explain the lightheadedness, sore body, pain in his eyes and teeth, and finally a strange feeling of hunger that was getting stronger over time. Recovery girl was honestly unsure from all of this and of what was happening. The tests she was doing weren't helping either. Turning to Momo, she asked, "Dear, can you get me some more ice packs and a glass of water for him?" Momo nodded and left the room, but before she did, she took one more worried glance his way. Recover girl waited until she was as sure Momo left out of range of hearing and turned to Izuku. "Okay, explain now or I start whacking you with my cane." Izuku gulped. "Of course ma'am, I was training last night and suddenly passed out. I soon woke up inside One for All and talked with the past users. The first user explained that I may be getting a new quirk that One for All is making using my unused quirk genes that didn't activate when I was younger. They said it would hurt and I'd be exhausted, but this is like nothing I'd imagined." Recovery girl went wide-eyed and started to search her doctor's bag until she got what she was looking for. She turned to him with a syringe in hand and spoke. "All right, I'm taking a blood sample and I'm going to my office to use my machines there. This will tell me what kind of quirk you're manifesting and some of the aspects of it, but I can't do anything for the pain and fever. I'm sorry, but the best I can give you is over-the-counter pain meds for you to sleep this off." The ninth grunted in pain but replied, It's fine, I can power through this." Chio gave him a saddened look as she drew the blood and finished storing it right as Momo arrived. "Recovery girl, I brought the things you wanted." The woman nodded and placed the blood away, and taking out a bottle of pain meds, she took the water and gave them both to Izuku to take. He took the pills easy enough, and Recover girl turned to Momo, speaking to her. "Yaoyorozu dear, I'm going to need you to stay with him for the rest of the day. I'll be telling Aizawa about his condition and that you both will be excused. If anything happens, please contact me while I'm in my office going over his blood work." Momo gave a worried nod and went to his side to sit at his desk looking over him. Izuku at this point was too drowsy to be embarrassed or flustered at the idea of a girl staying with him in his room all day. He was out of it. Recovery girl gave them a short goodbye as she rushed back to her office to test what quirk he was now showing signs of exhibiting. She was honestly curious what kind of quirk would have such a rough emergence when first awakened. Time skipped 30 minutes. After a while of Momo waiting at his bedside, Izuku had fallen asleep and she couldn't help but stare at his bedridden form. The twitching of his muscles and facial features every very minutes made her heart sink every time it happened. Even when asleep he was in pain and it worried her to no end. She was so distraught she didn't notice when her hand moved on its own and enveloped his in a tight embrace. They stayed like that for about another hour, and in that time Momo had fallen asleep with her head on the bed. That was until she heard a knock on the door. Thinking it was Recovery Girl, she got up and went to open it. Only to come face to air, well, more like face to very short person, as Mineta had been the one to knock on the door. The two looked at each other blankly until the midget looked past her and at the sweating and panting form of Izuku. Now it wouldn't be impossible to misunderstand the situation, since Momo was looking disheveled with her roughed up hair, clothes wrinkled from falling asleep, and the stress she had gone through, making it quite easy to misunderstanding. With his beady little eyes growing to the size of plates, Mineta screamed for the whole dorm to hear, "Oh my god, Yaoyorozu and Midoriya are fucking." And just like that, the situation went from 0 to 100 in less than 30 seconds, as immediately 4 figures came crashing into the hallway from the stairway or the rooms on the current floor. Uraraka was the first to arrive, which confused Momo because Uraraka had the farthest room from Izuku, all the way 2 floors up and on the opposite side of the stairs and elevator. Said brown-haired girl stared into the room with a shocked face and turned to Momo with an accusatory glare. "Ya dang harlot, who do ya think you are to take my Deku-kun?" Before Momo could even gasp, Iida came drifting in while chopping the air. "Uraraka, that is highly inappropriate. However, Yaoyorozu, this is even more inappropriate and very unbecoming of the vice president." Momo was about to say something again, only to be cut off for the second time by Kaminari. "Holy creaming wheat cakes. Midoriya is the first of us to get laid, and it was with the hottest girl in school to boot." Okay, Momo was starting to get irritated now. If someone interrupted her one more time, she was gonna. She'd thoughts were cut off by the bomber of Class 2A. What the hell is this all about? No way Deku got laid, especially not with crafting table of all people. With one of her eyes twitching, Momo crafted a baseball bat from her forearm and started to pat her hand with it, causing a couple of them to back up. Okay, there seems to have been a misunderstanding here, but even if there wasn't, you all should shut up and go about your business without yelling like a bunch of dumb, immature children who don't know when to keep your mouths shut. Now everyone minus Bakugo backed up fully. Said boy didn't care for her threats. Who cares? Deku is still a virgin and will always be one. The only guy getting some around here is me. The vice president didn't get time to retort as a growl was heard from behind her. When she turned, she saw Izuku towering behind her without his shirt on, showing off his toned torso that was covered in sweat. But that wasn't all, as his face was in the form of a scowl and his eyes shined a bright sky blue color that she found beautiful. But his teeth clenched as he looked upon Bakugo, causing the boy to glare back. "What is it, nerd? Can't handle the truth that you'll never get some from a woman and you'll die alone while I'll be drowning in pussy?" Izuku's glare turned up to 11 as it looked straight up murderous, as his teeth were visibly sharp and his nails dug into his palm, drawing blood. "Kachan, why don't you go talk about your fantasies to someone like Kirishima, who for some reason cared to listen to them, and leave?" Bakugo's hands started popping with mini explosions as he got in close to his rival, to the point they were glaring each other down. But unlike all the times before, Izuku didn't back down and instead growled once again, but more guttural and feral, sounding like it came from a beast and not from a mortal man. Bakugo and the others were surprised by this, but before the situation could escalate, Momo stepped in and grabbed Izuku's arm and placed it in between her breast unconsciously. "Izuku, it's okay. Let's get you back to bed, you're sick and need rest, like Recovery Girl ordered." Izuku stayed glaring at Bakugo for a solid couple of seconds before turning away and started going towards his bed. "Okay, I'll do as you ask, Momo." The brunette smiled at this and didn't even notice the slip of calling him by his first name or him calling her by her first name, which the others did. But before Izuku could get too far, the Mad Bomber said one last remark that pissed him off to the point he almost snapped. "Oh, you need your little bimbo girlfriend to help you win fights. I bet she even holds your dick to help you piss too, doesn't she? Probably shakes it for ya too," he said mockingly. Izuku's teeth became pointed and his eyes became silted and glowed so much the others took notice when he turned, and with all his hate he glared at the blonde bastard that spoke bad of Momo. Before anyone could react, his arm shot out, grabbing the blonde's neck in a tight hold, and he dragged him into his face. "Say something bad about me all you want, but do that to her and I'll tear your throat out and see how much you bark then," he said in a dark, deathly tone that made shivers go down their spines, minus Momo. They were all taken aback by this, but not more than Bakugo, who for some reason felt a sort of pride in his rival for finally standing up for himself. After all, they had gotten over their grievances a long time ago and they usually did this cat and mouse shit, but now that it had a change of pace, the blonde found it amusing. However, what happened next was an even bigger surprise as Momo glared at said blonde with hate and protectiveness in her eyes. "Bakugo, I think it's time for you to leave." When he turned to look at her, he saw the same shining eyes as his rival but in a red color and even more venom in her voice. Bakugo didn't say anything and just left after Izuku let go of him. This left the rest of their classmates to leave or stay there, too stunned from how Izuku threatened the blonde to move. Momo, taking charge of the situation, started to explain. "Okay, as I said previously, Izuku is sick and needs to stay at the dorms today under recovery girls' orders, and I've been tasked to stay and keep watch over him. Kyoka, can you take notes for me while I'm here?" Said rocker chick snapped out of her shock and nodded. Sure thing, but before I go to class, can I just say that was single-handedly the hottest thing I've ever seen in my life." "Jiro, Kyoka," yelled out Uraraka and Momo in unison before looking and glaring at each other. Momo sighed and closed the door, much to Uraraka's agitation. Said brown-haired girl grumbled some curses under her breath as she walked off towards her room, leaving Kyoka and unsurprisingly Mina and Toru. The rocker turned to them and asked, "I mean, I wasn't wrong, right?" Mina and Toru gave blank nods and the pink-skinned alien responded, "Nope, that was 100% full-on daddy energy right there and I'm all for it." Her faithful invisible companion agreed, "Yup, hottest shit I've ever seen, and did you see his eyes turn blue? I don't know what that was about, but it was freaking hot." The group of girls agreed with each other before they all moved on and went to get dressed for school, leaving the midget that started it all to grumble to himself, "They really didn't even notice I was still here. Damn stupid anime protagonist and his stupid harem luck." Izuku sat onto his bed with a sigh. He didn't know what had gotten into him. One moment he was fine and then the next he had Bakugo by the throat and threatened him. But what was worse was the stupid hungry feeling had gotten worse, and he could swear he was salivating now that he was alone with Momo and had adrenaline in his veins. Speaking of Momo, she had sat down next to him and started complaining, "Who does that jackass think he is? Why wouldn't I have sexual intercourse with you? You're super handsome and have a rocking body, and that's just the aesthetic reasons. There's also the fact you're kind and would never brag about it or think of me badly if I did." Now it was Izuku's turn to be shocked. "Wait, what? You really think about me like that? And would be okay doing that sort of stuff with me?" Momo blushed but couldn't stop herself from answering truthfully, "Well duh, you're a great guy and anyone would love to be your girlfriend. I know it for a fact since Kyoka and I talk about what we would do to you all the time if given the chance. Just the other day I told her about a dream I had the night before about you and I doing lewd stuff together." Izuku was unsure how to respond to such bold words. If this was a year ago he would have fainted, but with so much interaction with girls since he came to UA he had gotten over that problem. But before anything could be said he felt a warmth rush over his body and his mind went blank for a moment. Like a whirlwind his body felt all sorts of emotions and his mind triggered something. Momo almost felt like crying since after her proclamation of her feelings Izuku had stayed quiet, not saying a word for over 5 minutes, but as her tears began to fall he lunged and tackled her onto the bed, mounting her. Her heart skipped a beat and her face became flush. "Izuku, what are you?" She couldn't continue as Izuku's mouth connected with her own. It surprised her, but her mind became hazy as his tongue parted her lips and entered her mouth. This kiss turned into a full make-out session, making her weep in surprise. However, as the kiss progressed she felt his hands roam over her figure. From her wide hips to her plump chest his hands dug into her. She couldn't help herself and moaned into the kiss, and Izuku stopped to look at her. It was then that she noticed his blue glowing eyes that bore into her own, completely replacing his old green ones. She didn't know why this was happening but didn't stop it from happening as her own hands dug into his back, her nails digging in and scratching it up, leaving her mark on him. Izuku in his lust-filled haze went to her neck and bit into it. The shriek she let out didn't stop him and only made him go even farther, tearing her tank top off and throwing it to the side. There was no stopping them from going further as they were too lost in each other and their hormones had skyrocketed. It didn't help that the concrete walls absorbed sound for those who had amazing hearing like Kyoka and Shoji, who wouldn't be able to hear them and end up stop them before they crossed the line. A couple hours later, Chio Shuzenji had just gotten the reports back from the blood analyzer, and being shocked would be an understatement. From what she was reading, this had to be the most intricate quirk she had ever heard of. Not only did it strengthen and make the muscles more elastic, but it gave Midoriya a healing factor that was by her calculations healing his old injuries. The arm he had nerve damage in was mostly healed by this point, like it never happened except for the scars to show it did indeed happen. But that wasn't all. From further inspection his instincts were improved to the point they were better than any animals, and speaking of animals, some of his genetics showed signs of a canine of some sort. She wasn't a zoologist so she couldn't tell what kind it was to be exact and would need to contact a friend of hers for a better reading. However, the most interesting was that he had stages or forms inside his new quirk. First form was the basic boost he had without showing signs of becoming animalistic, but the second stage was just that. He would become more beast-like and ferocious but also stronger, his strength would double and his instincts would be that of an animal. The third and maybe final stage though was a mystery as it was very complex and she didn't have the capabilities to fully analyze what she was reading. Hell, there could be a fourth stage for all she knew as she was way out of her depth at this point. But there seemed to be one thing that piqued her interest. On the hormone readings it showed they were doubled if not tripled their natural capacity. It was almost as if he was an animal in heat from these readings. Oh god, he was in heat, wasn't he? And she had the most physically developed girl in his class watch over him alone for the past 2 hours or more. In a frantic struggle she ran to her phone and called Aizawa, hoping he would pick up as soon as possible. The phone rang once, twice, and on the third Aizawa answered. "Hello, what is it you need, recovery girl?" Chio gulped as she started to explain. "Shota, I've made a huge mistake and need you to rush over to the dorms. Midoriya had developed a new quirk and is in heat. I repeat, Izuku, Midoriya is in an animalistic-like heat and is alone with Miss Yaoyorozu without any adult supervision. Opening square bracket quote ... Fuck, alright, I'm on my way. With Aizawa." The tired teacher of 2A had just got off the call with recovery girl. Unfortunately he had his phone on speaker and the whole class had heard of the situation. He had to restrain Uraraka with his scarf as she shouted curses and, in her own words, "Stab a bitch." To say he was having a rough time was a definite understatement. Sighing at this bullshit he had to deal with, he threw Uraraka towards Sue, who wrapped her in her tongue and tried calming her down, but from the way Uraraka was kicking and screaming he could tell she wouldn't calm down anytime soon. Without anything holding him back, the teacher ran out the classroom and booked it towards the dorms, not even stopping when Present Mike and Midnight called out to him. Speaking of which, Present Mike turned to Nimari Kayama, also known as Midnight. "What do you think happened for Shota to run like his sleeping bag was being held hostage?" Nimari had her Midnight senses tingling. "I think this has to do something with a student or students doing something sexual in nature." Mike gave her a strange look. "And how would you know that?" Nimari smiled. "With my Midnight senses, of course." Mike deadpanned. "You're what?" Nimari huffed in annoyance. "My Midnight senses. I can sense when someone does something sexual in the area. In fact, I sensed something happening in the direction he was going about 3 hours ago." Mike didn't know how to respond to this and asked, "Should we go help then?" The purple-haired heroine shrugged. "Sure, I got nothing to do since this is a break period for me." Back with Aizawa, Eraserhead was huffing as he kicked the door to the dorms open and rushed to the stairs, running to the second floor. When he arrived on the desired floor he felt an eerie sense of dread. Walking towards the door to Midoriya's room he gulped and knocked. It took him a minute until a sweaty, hickey and bite mark filled Midoriya. Izuku opened it and greeted him. "Oh, hello sensei. What are you doing here?" Aizawa looked past him to see Momo covered by a blanket but just as sweaty and passed out unconscious. Looking back to Izuku he saw him gulp. "The old lady sent me since she found that you were in animal-like rut cycle. Seems I was far too late." He responded, sounding completely done with this entire situation. Izuku, upon hearing this, looked down sadly. "I'm sorry sensei, by the time I knew what was happening it was all over." Aizawa rubbed the bridge of his nose and sighed. "It's not your fault, problem child. This is a quirk accident no one could have seen coming. You two won't be at fault for this, and even if you were then you'd be in no trouble at all since sexual relationships aren't exactly frowned upon in UA. At best you'd get a scolding from Nezu and our sex ed teacher." Raising an eyebrow and tilting his head, Izuku asked, "Wait, we have a sex ed teacher?" Aizawa didn't get the chance to reply as a new feminine voice spoke out in excitement. "Of course there is, and it is Midnight." Turning towards the elevator the two saw Midnight and Present Mike walking towards them. Mike chuckled at his female best friend. "Really, Nimari, a JoJo reference?" Nimari shrugged. "Can't a girl pull a JoJo reference every now and again?" Mike hummed. I guess not. Anyway, what's the situation, Shota? Aizawa sighed before explaining the entire situation to the surprise of the two pro-heroes, mainly Mike, who shouted at the top of his lungs and accidentally used his quirk to broadcast to the entire school. What? Izuku Midoriya and Momo Yaoyorozu had sex. And Midoriya has awaked a second quirk. Nimari hit Mike upside the head to shut him up while she clutched her ears. Damn it, Hizashi, my fucking ears are bleeding. From behind Izuku, Momo had sat up with the bed sheet covering her. Izuku dear, what happened? What was that? Izuku turned and gave her a warm smile to comfort her. It's nothing, just present Mike Sensei being himself and telling basically the entire school what we did, but then again I bet if he didn't, Mina would have spread it herself. Momo blinked a couple times before blushing up a storm. What? Oh no, and I still can't feel from my stomach down and it's been at least an hour. Mina is gonna tease me to death for this. Nimari blushed at hearing this and giggled like the pervert she was. Ha! I am so telling everyone that Midoriya absolutely destroyed Yaoyorozu in bed. Oh, I can even film All Might when I tell him how his son Detroit smashed his girlfriend, it'll be hilarious. Izuku sputtered, he's not my father. Nimari smirked, so you denied that but not the part about absolutely going to ham on Momo-chan's honey pot. I didn't. You put words in my mouth. He said with an accusatory finger pointed at her. Nimari laughed, and I bet you forced yourself inside her mouth quite a lot, didn't you? Aizawa had enough of this crude banter and wrapped the R-rated heroine in his scarf, sighing one last time. He turned and spoke. The old lady will be by in about an hour, so if you need anything then call or text her. I'm leaving since I don't get paid enough for this shit. Mike laughed and waved at the greenette, following the grumpy cat lover out of the dorms. This left Izuku flustered and horrified of what he needed to do next. He turned and closed the door behind him, going over towards Momo, who was still sitting and hadn't moved. Gulping, he sat down and rubbed the back of his neck. So, what should we do about this thing between us? Momo fidgeted nervously. I mean, if you don't want to be in a relationship with me then it's alright. I may have pushed my feelings for you and sort of forced you into doing that with me. Izuku shot his head up and looked shocked. What? No, of course not. You didn't push me into doing that, and I would love to have you as my girlfriend. I just hope you understand how wrong it felt for me to basically take advantage of you while I wasn't in control. The heiress to the Yaoyorozu family glared. You didn't take advantage of me, I did it to you. I mean, I'm the one who tore your shorts off and forced your face into my OOAY. Okay, I think I get it. We're both equally at blame here, but I still think I need to address the elephant in the room. Momo tilted her head. What do you need to address? Izuku gulped once more. Well, we didn't use protection and you said you can't feel your legs, so I was wondering if I should ask Recovery Girl to bring a wheelchair if you aren't able to walk on your own. Maybe we should ask for that and some morning after pills since I'm not on anything like that. They both awkwardly sat, not knowing how to progress the conversation, so by clearing his throat into his fist, Izuku started. I'll send her a text, hopefully it's not awkward when she gets here. Momo nodded. Yes, it would be very uncomfortable to have a conversation with someone like her who we all basically see as a grandmother. Izuku chuckled at this and sent the text and received a short reply of K. He laughed a little at the response and showed it to Momo, who giggled. They stayed like this for a while, and in that time Izuku and Momo had gotten dressed, although Izuku did have to help Momo put her clothes on as she still couldn't feel or really move her legs. It was about 10 minutes later that Recovery Girl knocked and was let in. To the two teens' surprise, she had brought a wheelchair and a cast. Recovery Girl, why did you bring a leg cast? Asked Momo. Recovery Girl raised a brow and glanced at Izuku to see him standing upright. Oh, I guess the wheelchair wasn't for Midoriya. My mistake. Izuku pouted at this, but Momo couldn't help herself and laugh at him. Izuku gave her a look, but she didn't care and continued to laugh. Recovery Girl rolled her eyes at the obvious young couple. Looking at Momo and seeing her still sat in bed, she had to ask, so the wheelchair is for you, young one? He didn't hurt you or anything, right? Momo stopped laughing to blush. He didn't hurt me per se, more like bruised my spine as he takes a quick glance at the bed, which had a few pieces sticking out in odd ways. Broke the bed. Recovery Girl felt awkward hearing this, but hid it using her years of being a professional doctor and nurse. Be that as it may, Are you in any pain, dear? It took her a second to try and feel her body, but when she did, she just felt sore. No, nothing more than sore muscles and a little discomfort in my nether region. Recovery girl nodded and gave her some pain meds. Then it sounds like you should probably be fine by tomorrow or the day after. This usually happens when a woman has her first time, but apparently this idiot was too big for you to handle, so that doesn't help the situation any either. The two blushed and looked anywhere but the elderly woman, making said woman grin a bit. After a second to look through her doctor's mag, Chio gave Momo some morning after pills and took out her clipboard. Alright, so let me explain what's happening. For one, Midoriya is developing a new quirk. This quirk is a transformation type that also has passive effects. At this, Izuku and Momo were surprised, and in Momo's case started freaking out. Holy mother of H, how is that even possible? Recovery girl face palmed. I'm not exactly sure, but it's what's happening, so all we can do is deal with it. Now, if there aren't any more interruptions, I'd like to list what I have found. Momo blushed in embarrassment at this. Sorry ma'am, go ahead. Chio nodded in approval and started reading from her clipboard. Alright, so to put it simply, your body will be stronger and more durable with enhanced endurance, besides that you will have animalistic instincts and increased senses. She flipped the paper to the next page and continued. It seems like your new quirk has a transformation aspect that has stages to it. The first stage is your regular look and the previously said improvements that are passive. Izuku and Momo had their mouths gaping at this, but Chio was not done. He has a more bestial form and maybe more, but it's not exactly clear in my readings. In this form you may grow more hair, sharper teeth and become more feral in mindset, similar to hound dog. Izuku gulped at this and asked, that's a lot to take in. And that's all right. No growing a tail or wings. Chio glanced at her papers and hummed. You may grow a bit taller and grow some facial hair. But that's all I can tell from my tests, although there is some room for error. The two teens grimaced at the last part but nodded to it. With her explanation done, Chio gave them some medication for pain or discomfort and left, telling them to stay safe and not do anything stupid while she was gone. Time skip. It was around 3:45 p.m. now and classes would be out soon. Izuku and Momo were pretty hungry since they missed breakfast and lunch, so they went down to the common area kitchen to make some food. Well, more like Izuku made the food while Momo sat in her wheelchair that was placed at the dining room table. Izuku made a bowl of his favorite food, katsudon, which Momo had actually never had, much to the Greenette's surprise. At hearing this blasphemy caused him to pull out all the stops and make it just like his mother to make a good impression. It took about half an hour, and it was about when the others were arriving that he handed Momo her bowl. Izuku heard the voice of one Shoto Todoroki and turned to said teen. Midoriya, why is Yaoyorozu in a wheelchair? Also, did you make soba? Izuku started to sweat nervously as he answered. She's hurt is all, but recovery girl said she'd be fine by tomorrow or the day after. And no, I didn't make soba, but you can have a bowl of katsudon if you'd like. Shoto gave small nod, moving over to the kitchen to get some. This left Izuku and Momo sitting by themselves to eat their food until one of the others came over, which by the looks of it would be Mina, Toru, and Kyoka. The pink alien smirked as she wiggled her eyebrows. So, Yao Momo dear. It seems our small green beast has ravaged you to the point of not being able to walk. Am I correct in thinking this? Momo blushed but steeled her features. I don't know what you're talking about, Mina, but you've definitely got the wrong idea. Mina smirked even deeper, and the announcement earlier by Mike Sensei was false. Don't play like that, Momo-chan, just give us the details already and we'll be on our way. The heiress blushed more and looked towards Izuku for help, but said boy was having his own problems from the glares he was getting from both Kaminari and Mineta, and surprisingly enough from Ochako. He didn't understand what he did to make Ochako angry with him, but from the way she was glaring he knew he did something really bad to upset her. Wonder if Ochako's angry at me for what I did to Momo. I just hope she doesn't think I hurt her on purpose or anything. Thought the future #1 hero. As more and more of the class entered, Izuku noticed they were all giving him strange looks. Some were odd, but that was mainly from the guys, and the girls were strange. They were blushing and wouldn't stop talking to Momo and asking things he couldn't exactly hear. However, by the way their faces turned a deeper red and looked at him while giggling, he could safely say he felt like he was in danger. It was only a few hours since the class arrived back to the dorms after classes had been released, and Izuku could fully say he was having a bad time. From having the guys badger him to the girls' weird giggles when he looked their direction, it was all starting to irritate him, which in itself made him feel strange since he was never someone easy to anger. He could only conclude it was his heightened hormones or something and assume he was more emotionally driven from his animal side, but if that wasn't bad enough he had to deal with Ochako glaring into the back of his skull. Okami, he was irritated enough he just wanted to march over towards her and kiss those plump pink lips of hers to make that glare go away. Okay, maybe he was also getting horny even after a few hours of doing it with Momo. 5. But he couldn't help it. Being in heat means he wants to do it a lot, and even now he couldn't help but glance at a couple of the girls with a heated look. Jiro's thighs, Ochako's lips and hips, Mina's horns, Sue's tongue, and finally Taurus's full frame being shown through her floating clothes. It was all just so much, and that was without mentioning Momo. 2. He just couldn't not look at them. They were all just too damn attractive. It was hard not to openly drool at them. Unlike Izuku, a certain two perverts were openly gawking at the girls and even drooled in the case of a certain grape-haired boy. Izuku, at seeing them perv, openly growled deeply while his fingernails lengthened and cut into the table he was sitting at. It was only when he noticed his actions did he stop and have his claws retract. He was surprised at the claws but realized it was probably something new from his awakening and he'd just have to get used to it. Sighing to himself, he looked towards Aizawa, who had just came into the dorms and made a beeline towards him. Izuku could only sit and think, well, this could either be very good or very bad. In a few steps Aizawa was in front of him, and by the usual annoyed face he knew it had something to do with Nezu. Okay, what does Principal Nezu want now? The tired teacher smirked, very observant, and yeah, it's the rat again. He wants to speak with you about something in his office, so head over there. Izuku gave a nod and replied, sure thing Aizawa-sensei, I'll head over now so I won't be too late for dinner. Aizawa gave a tired nod and skulked off back from whence he came, leaving Izuku to get up and go out the dorms, but not before giving Momo a wave and a smile, which she returned with a blush. He walked for a while, seeing a few clubs going about their after-school activities. A little after 5 minutes of walking he was about to turn down a hallway leading to Nezu's office, where he bumped into someone at the turn, causing the other person to fall down. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Here, let me help you up, he said while offering a hand. The woman took it and was pulled up. Thanks, sorry about that, got lost since it's been a bit since I've been here, and the people I was with, well, I sorta ran ahead of them, so when I realized I was lost I didn't have anyone to help me out. Say, could you direct me towards the rat's office? Izuku, realizing after a second who she was talking about, and snorted, sure thing, I'm actually going there now. You were pretty close too, so just follow me. The woman smirked, kinda reminding the green-haired boy of his explosively blonde classmate, but shaking that thought aside he heard the woman speak while holding her chin. I don't think I introduced myself, did I? Oh well, I guess now is a best time as any. Name's Rumi Usugiyama, also known as the new up-and-coming rookie hero Maruko. Izuku gave a nod and smiled back. Cool, I thought I recognized you. You're currently number 10, right? Maruko nodded. Yup, although the new rankings are coming up soon, so maybe I'll be higher. Nice, so what did you need to see Nezu about? Asked the tall wolf boy. Rumi shrugged. Nothing much. He said something about helping a kid out with his new mutation to his quirk or whatever. But I'm mainly the person going to help them control their instincts in battle. That's all I'm here for, unless the kid wants to spar, which if they're strong enough maybe I can get a good workout in while I'm here. Izuku couldn't help but, at this and think that it sounded pretty similar to his situation, but he couldn't exactly focus due to how sexy the woman next to him was. From her toned and thick with 3C's thighs and her powerful stride, it was all doing things to his hormones, and that wasn't accounting for the sweet scent coming off of her. Rumi Usugiyama wasn't far behind from Izuku's thoughts. She could tell Izuku was strong by the primal presence he emitted, and when looking at his strong frame and wide shoulders she could tell he was strong, but even more than that were his pheromones. Jesus, this dude's an alpha if I've ever seen one. Which unfortunately I haven't, but this feeling I'm getting and all the strong pheromones I'm smelling are telling me he is. Sorta reminds me of the kid Nezu was talking about, and he did mention he was going there right when I was going there to meet the kid. Oh, he's the kid. I shoulda connected that faster if I'm being honest, thought Rumi. Izuku and Rumi made it to the office and knocked. After a few moments of waiting they heard a small enter and did just that. Principal Nezu, you called for me? Inquired the teen. Nezu looked up from his computer and adjusted his tie. Ah yes, and it seems you have arrived and even brought one of the people I wanted to introduce you to. Izuku perked up at this and turned to Rumi. She gave him a small wave and he turned back to Nezu. And why would I be meeting her and a few others exactly? The rat chuckled at the question. Oh, it's quite obvious, I believe. Since your newly awakened quirk arrived, I contacted a few people I believe could help you in controlling your new instincts and urges. Izuku grimaced a bit at the last part, already knowing he failed in that regarding when it came to him and Momo, yet unknowingly his tenseness was noticed by Rumi and Nezu, but they didn't pry on it. Okay. Yeah, I could use some help with that. So who else besides Miss Maruko will be helping me? Izuku asked. Mirko rolled her eyes at being called Miss. Okay, first off, drop the Miss part. I'm like 3 years older than you, so just call me Mirko or even Rumi if y'all want. Izuku gave a nod to this but turned back to Nezu so he could answer his previous question, although before he did he could swear he heard footsteps that were oddly familiar. The principal smiled and gestured to the door, which opened automatically to show 2 women, one surprised with her hand locked in motion as she was previously about to knock before the door mysteriously opened. The other just shook her head at the principal's antics and walked in, soon followed by her companion. Izuku knew both of them immediately after looking at them. The first was obviously his art teacher Midnight, and the other was the partner of Mirko, being the dragon hero Yukio. He absent-mindedly noted the well-developed bodies of both the women, making Izuku gulped. Again Nezu and Mirko noticed along with the new arrivals, but this time Nezu spoke up. Ah, and I see you really do need help. Say, from your earlier reaction, did you perhaps indulge in those urges already? Because if so, I need to know to make sure nothing bad happens, and because I find it amusing. All those in the room turned and looked at Izuku, waiting to hear about what he had done, although they mainly thought it was something small like maybe eating meat raw or even chasing a squirrel or something, but boy were they in for a surprise. The boy in question started sweating nervously, causing Rumi to elbow him. Come on man, it can't be that bad. Izuku became more red and rubbed the back of his neck. Okay, I'll explain, but just know we both are alright with what we did. Alarm bells went off in the others' heads, but let the teen explain, and oh boy was it an explanation. From what he had said, their jaws dropped more and more. Izuku had explained what had happened since Momo opened his door to Mineta all the way up to how Aizawa, Mike and Midnight had arrived to see him and Momo sweaty from their not-so-decent escapades. Of course Midnight already knew, but liked to see the faces of the others when they realized she had already known and just played along. She couldn't help herself but break out laughing at their faces and how embarrassed Izuku had become by the end of it all. Nezu, seeing Izuku was done, rubbed his temples in thought before stopping and turning to the boy. Okay, first class you're gonna have is with Midnight to try and control your heat as much as you can for when it comes back. Izuku tilted his head at this. Wait, it's supposed to go away. Then why do I still feel like mating? Well, that doesn't sound good, said Rumi. Nimari, also known as Midnight, nodded. Yup, sounds like he may have an all-round heat cycle until he reaches an older age where he physically can't do it anymore. Everyone looked to her at this, making the woman sigh. Really, none of you would think the sex ed teacher would know about heat cycles for people with animal quirks. At that everyone shrugged or nodded and went back to the problem at hand. Nezu spoke while looking between Izuku and Nimari. The plan stays, but it seems Nimari-san will have to up the difficulty of the classes, and I say this for the girls of this school's safety. Please don't teach him anything too outrageous, and if you end up having sex with any other girls, Midoriya, do me a favor and make sure they take their anti-pregnancy pills, or you tell me otherwise so I can set something up for the soon-to-be pregnant girls. Izuku blushed but agreed, and Nimari smiled wickedly, making the poor teen worry for his safety. However, Rumi and Ryoko both looked at Izuku strangely, but thankfully no one noticed. Rumi leaned into her friend and whispered quietly, "You think he may be the one for us? You know, with how hard it is to find a male strong enough and be an alpha at the same time, he may just be the perfect match if we play our cards right." Ryoko merely hummed in thought before saying her piece. "I think he's the most likely partner for us. But from how he described this Momo girl, we may end up sharing him with her and maybe a few others, since Nimari seems pretty interested too. But we both know we won't have a problem with that since we're both bi." Rumi nodded at that. "Sure, but is it me or has he grown like an inch since we got here?" The draconic woman tilted her head looking at Izuku as he was getting the rundown about his new classes with the tree woman, and Ryoko could swear he did in fact appear taller, and was it just her, or did he now have 5 o'clock shadow on his face? Ryoko was never one for caring for others' personal space, so when she walked over and grasped Izuku's face and leaned in close to inspect him closely, obviously the teen blushed and got embarrassed at how close she was and the smell of her smoky perfume entering his nose. Ayukyu-san, can you release me please? Ryoko didn't respond as she looked at the hairs quickly growing on his face. She also looked at his eyes that appeared to glow a soft blue color that reminded her of the sky. Yup, he was definitely the one for them if his eyes could be so alluring, and by the smell of him, which was a strong mixed scent of pine trees and musk, she could definitely see herself and Rumi tag teaming him. Before she let go of his face, she kissed his cheek and walked back towards the now awestruck Rumi. Yes, it appears he is growing facial hair right before our eyes, and I do think he is slowly getting taller. I think he may not be done adapting to his new quirk and or mutation. Izuku was shook out of his shock by hearing her words and rubbed his face. To his surprise, he did feel hair growing, and now that she mentioned it, did he always see the top of Midnight's head? Probably not, but it was surreal to think about. Recovery Girl did say I would have some physical changes, but a beard and height were definitely not what I expected. My nails lengthening sure, and even sharper canines, but height and a beard just seem weird to me. Nezu hummed at this. Well, it could be weirder. You could have grown a tail or animal ears. Quote ... Oh yeah, those would be weird too. The room talked a bit more about Izuku's classes with the three, mainly how Rumi would be in charge of his fight instincts, Ryoko would help him with choosing to use one enhanced sense over another, and finally, Nimari's lust lessons, as she named them. Once it was all over, Izuku left and put an alarm for 9 a.m. for his first lust lesson. Kami, please don't let Mineta learn about those or he'd never hear the end of it. He walked the halls until he realized he had gone the wrong direction and instead was heading in the direction of the support department studio. On thinking it over, he decided to go and see Mei to tell her about his suit needing to be resized. A few steps later, he was at the door of the studio and braced himself as he opened it. Surprisingly enough, it didn't explode as soon as he touched the handle. He smirked at this turn of luck and turned the handle, only for the door to explode in his face and send him flying onto the floor. A pressure was felt on his chest, and when the smoke cleared, he sighed and greeted the girl. Hey Mei, how are you doing? Mei Hatsume lifted her steampunk goggles and straddled his waist, showing that she had no shirt or bra on. Oh hey there muscles, how are ya? You look a little different. Did someone put you in a machine with gamma radiation and a super soldier serum? Izuku just stared at the bouncing breast, barely comprehending what the pink-haired girl had said as she straddled him. I know I did not, but I did awaken a new quirk, so that's something. Mei stopped bouncing on him and got centimeters in front of his face. You what? That's amazing, I can't wait to make you new gear. So what is it? Laser eyes, flight, the power to seduce women with pheromones? No, nothing like that. I just have enhanced senses and am sort of a werewolf with different forms that I haven't quite used just yet. Mei got off of him and dragged him into the support studio while saying, this is going to be great, I can already see the babies I can make. But I'm gonna have to scrap your old suit, you've definitely outgrown it and I doubt it'll stretch. Izuku saddened at hearing this, but grew a small melancholic smile knowing that it was time to grow up and take another step in becoming the hero he wanted to be. Okay, I trust you to make me something great, so I'll wait for my new suit, just notify me when it's done. The pink-haired girl grinned and gave the teen a hug before running off to her workstation, a new suit coming right up. Just you wait, I'll create something that'll blow your socks off. I look forward to it. Now I gotta go back to the dorms for dinner, so see ya Mei. Also put a shirt on. He gave a wave before walking out of the studio and towards the dorms, leaving Mei to put a shirt on and construct her masterpiece. From the ideas she had, she just knew she would hit it big with this one. Oh, she could see it now, how Izuku would look amazing in it and sweep her off her feet right after he became #1 in the world, and then and only then he would confess his feelings for her and propose. Well, something like that, at least, since her actual thoughts got rather erotic in nature and can't be spoken about due to not wanting to traumatize anyone who had a mind-reading quirk. Time skip. Izuku had gotten back to the dorms and had eaten the curry made by Kirishima and Koji. It was pretty good and had a little spice to it that Izuku found he really liked. Other than that, nothing of note happened. Well, other than the others making a big deal about his facial hair and how he seemed taller and more bulky, but he tuned all of that out after a while of hearing it and instead focused on Momo, who had also gone over some slight changes. She had grown a few more inches and her eyes seemed more attractive and caught the light more, making them shine. He also couldn't help but notice a few lumps of hair on her head that looked like she had it messed with. He didn't understand it, but he wanted to scratch those hair lumps for some odd reason, but he pushed that urge aside and instead spent the rest of the evening with her, talking about setting up a date between them in a couple days. Later that night near bedtime, Izuku made it to Momo's room with her in his arms since she insisted he stay with her tonight as compensation for breaking his bed in half, which now that he thought about it made no sense since he was the one who physically broke it when he used full cowling near the end. However, he ignored that stray thought and entered the room of his girlfriend. Were they dating? They did plan a date, but he didn't remember if he asked her to be his girlfriend or not. That aside, he went and sat on the bed, placing her near the center of the bed and kissing her beautiful red lips, which she thoroughly enjoyed, and smiled lovingly at him when he stopped. Thanks for that, Izuku. Now wanna tell me what happened with Nezu? The wolf boy smiled before jokingly saying, sure, but it's a little much, so you might wanna sit down for this. Momo rolled her eyes at his joke, poking fun about her currently being wheelchair bound for the time being. Ha, very funny, but seriously, what did he want? He wanted to introduce me to some people who could help me with my new animal instincts and urges, he explained. Momo hummed at this and took a guess at who it was. Was one of them Hound Dog? Izuku shook his head. No, he's still on vacation to spend time with his wife and kids, remember? The heiress thought for a moment before realizing, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Still can't believe his wife is pregnant for the 6th time now. Izuku nodded. Yeah, I was surprised by that too, but like I was saying, it was actually 3 people. Those being Mirko for my fighting instinct, and Yukio for my ability to choose which of my enhanced senses to focus on. Momo hummed at this before realizing he didn't say who the 3rd one was and why. Izuku, that's only 2, what about the last one? Quote. The last one is Midnight Sensei, and she's responsible for helping me to control my breeding urges and controlling my heat the best I can. The onyx-eyed girl sat with wide eyes before exclaiming, what? But what if you end up betting her like you did me, or worse, she ends up teaching you how to have intercourse better than you already are? I can barely handle you now, what the hell would I go through if you were even just slightly better? Izuku's sweat dropped. That's what you're worried about. Not the fact I'm probably going to be edged like a simp, or even worse, like Mineta. Quote. Could be worse. You could accidentally get all of your trainers pregnant or something, or maybe even start lusting after the other girls in class. She said nonchalantly, making Izuku think he hit his head and this might all be a weird fever dream. When he pinched himself and felt pain, he knew it wasn't, but still felt confused on her priorities. After thinking for a bit, he just gave up and laid next to her and pulling her into his chest. Alright, that's enough of that. We got class tomorrow and it's already pretty late as it is, so let's relax for a bit as we get ready to sleep, maybe even put Netflix on or something. Momo pouted, wanting to talk more but knew he was right, and it helped she wanted to watch the first Jurassic Park since Netflix was doing a special month of pre-Quirk era movies that she had been looking forward to watching. So she pulled the covers over their legs and grabbed the remote before starting the movie, which, like she had hoped, was very good and an enjoyable watch that by the end made them both want to watch the sequels to see if they were just as good. But that was for another day, most likely tomorrow, as they needed to go to bed. Good night, Momo. Good night, Izuku. The heiress replied back with a smile, snuggling herself deeper into Izuku's chest. Next morning, Izuku had stirred due to something tickling his nose. The soft sensation caused him to turn his head a few times before he started to wake up fully and look at the offending item that woke him up. Blinking his eyes to get the tiredness to leave him, he glanced at the fluffy black objects that looked awfully a lot like a cat's ears. It took him a few seconds to understand what he was looking at and who the ears were attached to. Momo, you gotta wake up because I've gotta be seeing things, said Izuku with wide eyes. Momo groaned quietly and unladylike before tilting her head up to stare into Izuku's eyes with a grumpy expression. Izuku, this better be good or I'm hitting you. Izuku was surprised by this and thought, who knew Momo wasn't a morning person? Guess she takes her time waking up like Mom or Auntie Mitsuki before presenting herself to look like a natural awakening beauty. He looked up from her grumpy face to the 2 cat ears on her head and lifted a hand to rub one. The effect was immediate as Momo shivered and after a few more rubs moaned sensually, causing him to stop and blush. Momo at this point was fully awake and stared at him intensely. Izuku, what did you just do, and why do you have a tattoo on your chest? Single quote. Wait, what? Was all Izuku could think before looking down at the tattoo of a wolf and moon on his right pectoral. The wolfman looked at the tattoo that had seemingly magically appeared on his chest and gasped, "My mom is gonna kill me." Momo deadpanned at this. Really? That's what you're worried about? Izuku looked at her and noticed her cat ears and tail again. Oh yeah, and that too. Wait, I remember now. The feline girl peeked up at this. Remember what? Why I turned into a cat girl overnight, or that I am now a cat girl? Izuku started to sweat nervously before he explained. Well, do you remember how I have basically a mindscaper inner world inside of my quirk where I can go and talk to the past users? The newly made Neko girl at hearing this stopped and thought for a moment before nodding her head. Yeah, I think I remember you saying that in all the knowledge you dropped on me the other day, but what does that have to do with me becoming part cat like my mother? Izuku sighed at her bring up the bombs he dropped on her with One for All and his past of being quirkless. He rubbed his neck before explaining, alright. Well, it all sorta started when I woke up inside One for All. Inside of One for All. The teen wolf fell from the sky, landing face first onto the concrete. He stayed there for a second before his throat let a small groan escape weakly from his mouth and heard someone in front of him giggle. Lifting his head, he saw Nana stifling her giggles and failing horribly. That was hilarious. Ninth, but on a more serious note, we need to talk. Izuku pushed himself off the ground and stood to his new full height, which was a lot taller than Nana's. He stretched his body and yawned, still somehow feeling tired, while in his mind, okay, what's up? Nana pointed over her shoulder to Banjo, who was yelling while gesturing at the distant void, and to his companions, I'm telling ya, I saw it. And if it's out there, I'm gonna catch it. En sighed and wondered why he was cursed to be here, and Hikage merely stared at Banjo with a deadpan glare. The rest were just trying their best to ignore the boisterous man. Izuku and Nana walked over and Izuku asked, Banjo-san, what are you talking about? Banjo turned and smiled while the rest groaned, knowing exactly where this was going. Banjo wrapped his arm around Izuku's shoulders and brought him in close and spoke like an old fisherman talking about a mythical fish or an old man talking to the main Pokemon game character. I've seen it, a beast of beauty and grace, yet also a ferocious bastard. It walks amongst the void and howls out in freedom. At hearing this, the others sighed or groaned. Izuku raised an eyebrow. Banjo-san, can you maybe take this more seriously and tell me what's going on? Banjo face faltered before catching himself and sighing. I saw something that looked like a wolf in the void. I think it may be the representation of your new quirk, since, you know, you're basically a werewolf and all. Izuku was surprised to hear this, but then hummed in thought and turned to look into the void, while the others started debating on if Banjo even saw something at all. They were so entranced in proving Banjo wrong that they didn't see Izuku start walking off into the void as if there was still floor underneath his feet. Izuku was in a sort of trance as he looked upon what he recognized as a wolf made of galaxies and stars. The ninth user walked on until the others noticed his absence and went pale as they turned to look at where he had gone. Nana was wide-eyed and turned to Banjo. What the hell? How long has that thing been there? It's the size of a fucking house. Banjo smiled smugly. I have no idea, but I'm right, so that's all that matters. Nana glared at the older man and slapped him upside his bald head, slamming his face into the concrete and leaving a large crater in the floor. Meanwhile, with Izuku, he had approached the magnificent beast, and when he was in front of it, standing a few feet from its front paws, he reached his hand out, slowly at first, but then the fear of it retaliating lessened completely and he fully reached out with no fear. The wolf's nostrils exhaled, causing Izuku to flinch slightly, but he didn't retract his hand, and the wolf after a few silent moments nodded in respect to this as if it had tested him. As Izuku interacted with the wolf, the others looked to each other, each of them wondering what the hell to do, while the ninth played petting zoo. So, we didn't get to tell him about the fact we feel connected to that girl he's with. How are we gonna break the ice to him once this whole situation is over? Said Nana. Yoichi shrugged. Probably be blunt like usual. Nana nodded to this before turning back to the sight of Izuku and the wolf. I can do blunt. Back with Izuku, the wolf had laid itself down and put its head forward to nuzzle his hand, and in doing so both of them glowed brightly in a rainbow of color. The others covered their eyes to not be blinded by the light, but it barely helped as they all a second later blinked the stars out of their eyes. And when they finally regained their sight they saw the ninth with his eyes glowing and body going through a transformation that put all werewolf movies to shame. Holy, Nana started, shit, finished Banjo with a huge grin. Izuku however wasn't paying attention as his world turned white and he left his mindscape to awaken in the real world. Flashback ends. And that's the last thing I remember, although the past users are currently catching me up on the fact they can feel your connection to me through my quirk. Explained the green-haired young man. Looking now at his lover Izuku could see her flabbergasted and surprised expression which he thought was extremely cute. He waited a bit until she composed herself and spoke. So, I'm connected to you and that's why I'm a cat girl now? She asked with her head tilted in confusion. Izuku nodded at the question. I guess, I mean I'm not exactly sure but I can take you to Recovery Girl to make sure if that's what you want. Momo gave him a questioning look. Are you serious asking if I want to get checked out after cat ears and a tail appeared on my person out of seemingly nowhere? Izuku didn't say anything until he thought over her words. Are you acting like a tsundere because of your new cat awakening or because you wanna mess with me? A little bit of both if I'm being honest, replied Momo. Time skip. Izuku had taken Momo to see Recovery Girl who was rightfully angry to be woken up at such an early hour such as 5:17 a.m. But on seeing the two and their new appearances she quickly rushed them inside her office. The greenette hadn't noticed it before but he had grown to a full height of 7 feet 2 which was barely an inch off of his mentor All Might much to his own surprise and fright at being so ridiculously tall. Momo had also gotten a bit taller as well but not as dramatic as Izuku. Her height had shot from 5 feet 8 to 6 feet 2 making her moniker of Class 1A's Amazonian princess a bit more realistic. There were more smaller changes depending on who you asked, which Izuku would have tended to downplay most of his changes but to Momo and Recovery Girl they knew they were all quite dramatic. For one Izuku had a fully grown beard and hair on his other areas like armpits and his chest, but more than that his body packed on even more muscle than before making him almost on par with Endeavor in musculature. Momo during her test had found that her nails could elongate on command and when she wasn't paying attention and had gotten bored. But more importantly Recovery Girl told her she would also have a heat cycle similarly to her lover but hers was only every couple of months. In all they both were ridiculously changed from before and it was all the fault of his quirk it seemed. Recovery Girl had run a few tests and found his new ability was called Mate's Mark, which evolves and strengthens his lover or lovers. Izuku blushed at that last part. Yet that wasn't all to the ability as its activation only occurs when he impregnates his partner or partners, so in other words Momo was pregnant. On hearing the news Momo covered her mouth with tears in her eyes and she clutched Izuku's hand in worry, but also a mix of joy and maternal protectiveness. After a few moments to come to terms with the situation Momo asked a question that popped into her head as soon as she heard it. But I used a plan B, I shouldn't be pregnant and especially not so soon that's not biological possible. Izuku after getting out of his own shock nodded along with this wondering how this came to be, all the while the past users congratulated him on in Nana's words, seated the rich Amazon girl. Recovery Girl grimaced at hearing the questions the two shot at her but did her best to answer. It seems that his sperm is so potent that no plan B will ever work for anyone that has intercourse with him. In other words if even a drop enters a woman's womb they are likely to become pregnant. That explanation made both teens feel down. It wasn't their fault really due to Izuku's strange quirk awakening all of a sudden and their heightened hormonal state due to pheromones causing them to have sex in the first place. So it wasn't their faults, but it sure as hell felt like it due to their newly discovered parenthood and their natural self-doubt came to the forefront of their minds. Yet Recovery Girl on seeing their reactions immediately snapped at them, oh for the love of both of you weren't in control so this isn't either of your faults. Don't even think about blaming yourselves for this was purely an accident simple as that. Her words helped the two get out of their funk, but that still left them with their situation of becoming parents so soon. Momo looked to Recovery Girl with her lover's hand in hers and asked, so when exactly will I be giving birth? I know it may be hard to know but can you give us an estimate? Chiyo Shuzenji sighed deeply while walking over to her test results on the two, and grimaced deeper after reading it. Well, there's good news and bad news, which would you rather have first? Izuku and Momo looked at each other before Izuku gave her a smile and Momo returned it. They looked to the pro-heroine and said in unison. Bad, good. Wait, what? Why choose the bad, good? Both asked the other. Momo blinked and raised an eyebrow before replying. Well, I thought you'd like to hear the good first so we can enjoy the moment before it would be crushed. Izuku in turn blinked. Oh, I guess that sorta makes sense, but I usually prefer the bad news so that I can feel better after hearing the good news. Both could understand the other's reasoning and turned back to Recovery Girl, who was looking at them both with an unamused expression. If you're both done, I'd like to continue. Seeing the two stay silent, the heroine explained, to answer your earlier question, dear, you will be pushing that baby or babies out in about a week. Momo's jaw dropped and Izuku was no different. That was before their minds went full analytical on the situation, thinking of how it was even possible. Why their luck was so shit. And a dozen other questions and theories. It took Chiyo hitting them both on the shin to wake them from their stupor, and Momo half shrieked out in response before meowing at the end. Izuku similarly whined like a dog getting hurt. Both sounds made Chiyo surprised and she wrote a few things into her clipboard while also feeling bad for thinking she hurt an animal from the noise they made. After calming down from the news and their embarrassment about the noises they could now make, Izuku asked the question on both his and Momo's minds, and the other bit of news. Chiyo raised an eyebrow. Oh, that. There was neither good nor bad news. I just wanted to mess with you both to stop you from going catatonic from what I just told you. Both of the young adults stared at the amused nurse before shaking their heads and continued to talk some more. They scheduled a talk with their parents by asking Chiyo to inform Nezu of what has happened and a few things to help Momo throughout the week to come. The talk came to an end when Izuku's classes with his 3 new instructors were approaching that the green-haired boy had to say his goodbyes to Chiyo and the pair left to the dorms. Izuku wanted to put his lover in one of their friends' protection while he was gone, as an instinctual urge caused him to do it. It was probably around 7:45 a.m. now that their run to Recovery Girl was over, and on entering the dorms the two were met by their class, who were all in multiple different stages of worry. But upon the class hearing the doors open turned to okay, the entrance with relieved smiled but quickly turned to utter shock and bewilderment. Kyoka put it the best way to describe their surprise. Holy fucking shit. Well, most would have used less vulgar words, but the essence was there, and oh my Kami, were they surprised. The girls looked at Momo, who even in her wheelchair looked like a goddess taken form, just with added cat ears and tail. The guys similarly looked at Izuku in his hulking glory, his muscles flexing as he pushed Momo towards them and his face looking like a rugged man who's seen things and experienced far more than any of them. It definitely didn't help when he stood next to Kyoka that the height difference was fully shown. So when the two got in front of them all, Izuku's quick, hi, shook them violently from their dazed states. Some fell out of their chairs and some stood up and pointed at the pair with eyes the size of dinner plates. The most dramatic, however, was Kyoka, who had a nosebleed at the pair's handsome and beautiful transformations. It all made Izuku and Momo sweat drop and wonder if they were really that different from how they looked the other day, but at thinking that they couldn't help but think they would have reacted even worse if they hadn't also learned of Momo's cat ears and their 2 tattoos. So, can one of the girls watch Momo for a bit? I have to go meet up with my new teachers for my new quirk training. On hearing Izuku's question, Kyoka immediately stood back up off the ground that she fell on due to falling out of her chair and appeared to have blood-drenched tissue paper in her nostrils and proclaimed, I'll do it. Surprised by the punk girl's response, Izuku meekly nodded before rolling the heiress in front of her best friend and gave the raven-haired girl a kiss and some comforting words before leaving the dorms. Even after he left, the majority of the people present were looking at the door he had left out from, while the others looked to Momo inquisitively, pondering about her new features. Momo noticed the looks and sighed before explaining, Izuku has another aspect of his new quirk. To put it simply, whoever he has intercourse with will evolve in a way to their quirk or something else. As you all can see, I have manifested my mother's cat quirk, which is strange, but I'm not complaining. The creation user's words immediately made Mina squeal in delight before shouting, oh my god. Momo blushed but decided she needed to get some support from her friends, so she asked the girls to accompany her to her room to talk, Obviously they thought it was tea time and basically flashed the girl away as fast as Aizawa with no coffee running to Dunkin' Donuts for the nectar of the gods. In all it was hectic and the squeals Mina let out even caused their neighboring dorm to Class 1B to become curious as to what happened, but that wouldn't be answered until a bit later. With Izuku, the young man swallowed some saliva that had built up in anticipation due to what was in front of him. His first class of the day was with none other than Midnight for his newly dubbed lust lessons. Shiver. So yeah, he had ample reason to be nervous, so much that a shiver went down his spine, and could you blame him? For one, he had no idea what the R-rated heroine had in store for him, and two was the fact his heat was as high as ever since he had woken up this morning, and he was starting to pant just thinking about just being around a woman like Midnight. Thankfully this morning he had just enough willpower to focus on Momo's new additions and not ask to reenact their love-making from the day before. However, he didn't think his will was strong enough to not pounce on the sexual-themed heroine, and he felt like shit for knowing he would give in to temptation. With that all in mind, he felt his stomach drop as he grasped the handle and turned it, and what awaited him inside was nothing like he imagined. Midnight-sensei, why are you in nothing but a bath towel? He really tried to will his not-so-little Deku to stay soft, but it was a fast-losing battle. Midnight looked at him with a flutter of her eyes and motioned for him to come closer, and on reflex he did and approached the woman as she sat on a stool. When he was a few feet away from her, she uncrossed her legs and stood to her full height, not even caring for giving him a show of what was between her legs. She noted his newly built frame, height, chiseled face and purred in satisfaction. To answer that, I will say this: you are going to be strapped to this chair and I'm going to do all sorts of things to you. Your job is to resist as best you can, and if you do well I will reward you. Izuku growled slowly, not particularly liking the idea of being chained down and not in control, but her appearance and tone made him concede. Midnight, or Nimari Kayama, was having a blast already but knew she needed to get down to business before the perfect male specimen in front of her would actually pounce on her. She pushed him back and into the chair, and automatically the chair locked around his limbs, the action causing Izuku to growl deeply in irritation, but Nimari stopped it with a finger to his lips. "Oh, poor thing. Don't worry, I'm here to help you," she said with the most seductive voice Izuku had ever heard before. Izuku's mind went blank and his eyes turned blue and slitted. His instincts had taken over and he was no longer in control as his mind had gone fuzzy. Nimari noticed this though and sighed mentally as she started to let up on the seduction act, even if she was honestly pretty damn horny for the green-haired young man. "Seems you already need a break. I'll give you 10 minutes to compose yourself before continuing." In the back of Izuku's mind he heard and understood, but it took the whole 10 minutes to fully stop his dumping, as the guys in his class called it, but not even a minute later he needed another break. It went like this for a solid 2 hours before Izuku made a little bit of progress, which was that he made it to 5 minutes, which proved this task was going to be a lot harder than either of them thought. However, this did give the woman some fun and good practice in being extremely flirty, or well, more flirty than she was ever allowed to be, since there were harassment laws and other bullshit she couldn't get around. Though even she could tell she went a little too far by the end of it when she was fully naked in front of him and had taken his pants and underwear off, all while sitting on his lap. Yup, just a smidge too far, but who's to say, since she surely wouldn't, and Izuku was in a throbbing, panting mess with his eyes full of lust that were currently eye-fucking her. Oh well. They still had about an hour until he had to go to his next appointment for the day with Yukio, so she licked her lips and asked him something that would change her life without her knowing. "Say, why don't I give you a little present for being such a good stud?" She basically purred into his ear and pressing her breast against his chest. Izuku's only response was a small growl and to lick at her neck, much to the purple-haired woman's pleasure. She giggled at this and leaned into the licking and responded back. "Well, since you're so eager, let's just stop playing around and you and I make love." The wolf teen growled a little aggressively, which caused her to become confused before looking at his face. It was one of those looks a kid gives when they are given a toy that used to belong to their sibling, which caused Nimari to giggle. "Oh, don't worry. I may portray myself as an experienced woman, but truly I've only had sexual experiences with women, so you'll be my first and only male." Izuku perked up immediately and his licking turned to biting on her shoulder, that caused the woman to moan loudly and for it to echo through the room. Nimari, after a moment to compose herself, slapped his shoulder playfully. "Bad boy, I'll have to punish you for that," she said, not even noticing the mark appear on her shoulder in its inactivity state, waiting for the impregnating to start the evolution sequence. It also didn't help that Izuku was going to be late to his appointment with Yukio, but he and Nimari wouldn't care when the dragon would come over and complain, since they'd be too busy still going at it when she arrived. Yukio, the number 10 hero also known as Ryuko Tatsuma, was tapping her foot. She was so because she was annoyed and really freaking horny. Why, you may ask? Because her whole reason of coming to UA had been balls deep inside of the R-rated heroine and had come inside of the woman enough to make her stomach budge, and Ryuko had just walked in on them after finding Izuku Midoriya being late to their meeting together. Now it wasn't like she cared if he had sex with anyone or even Midnight for that fact, but upon walking in on the two, the pheromones had assaulted her sensitive nose and caused her ovaries to quiver in need. So now she was as horny as Cowgirl, the female heroine in the US of fucking A, who had giant horns to go along with her extreme height and huge tits. The only good thing about this situation was that Ryuko had an amazing poker face that rivaled Smintas's, and that man had a liter cinder block for a head. Her blush was the only problem, as her cheeks were lightly dusted red, but thankfully, with Izuku bowing in front of her with his head touching the ground in a dogeza position, he was unable to see her blush. Coughing into her fist, she spoke to the young man in front of her while eyeing the sex-drunk Nimari, who was still passed out with half-lidded eyes and a goofy smile plastered on her face. So, wanna explain how this happened? Izuku gulped audibly and he spoke from his dogeza position. I'm sorry ma'am, but after training she decided to give me a reward and things got out of control from there. Ryuko just blinked at him with a deadpan stare before going over to Nimari and kneeling down next to her, she poking the passed-out woman's stuffed stomach, causing the pruplet to groan. Turning to Izuku, the dragoness raised an eyebrow before speaking. It seems more like a reward for her than one for you, but then again I guess it was mutual. Izuku turned an even deeper color of red but didn't retort, since he had nothing to save face to the remark made against him, since what she had said was completely correct. Sorry, was all he could say. Ryuko huffed at the apology and got up from her kneeling position next to Nimari and walked to the front of Izuku, causing him to shiver from her eyes staring down on him. Well, since we're behind on time, let's get started now so we actually get some practice in before Rumi gets her hands on you. Hopefully you don't fuck her too, or else your training is going to have to be harsher," said the dragoness. Izuku paled at the idea of going through tougher training, so he nodded rapidly, but then he turned back to Nimari, who was still dazed and out of it with no clothes on. "Shouldn't we at least dress her first before we get started?" Ryuko shrugged. "I don't care, if you wanna put your clothes on her then fine, but hurry up, we only have an hour." The greenette looked at the dragon female incredulously for a second before shaking his head and going over to dress Nimari in his t-shirt and her panties, which were conveniently next to the desk they had fornicated on. An hour later, with the little time he had with Yukio, it was enough for him to learn about some of the smaller things, like how to pop out his claws, his enhanced hearing and smell. They were supposed to get through his enhanced eyesight and tracking, but they didn't have enough time, so he had to end the training with her and rush over to the gym he and Rumi would be using for the day. He had left Nimari in Ryuko's care, getting a groan from the pile of mush that was Nimari, as she had woken up at some point but was too out of it physically to get up, and her throat was very hoarse due to screaming during their earlier activities. When he made it to the gym, he opened it to see Mirko, Rumi in all her glory. The woman was stretching, and when he opened the door she had turned to see him and smirked with excitement. "Oh, you're finally here, and it seems you've been busy. Sniff sniff, you smell like that dominatrix woman." The wolf teen wanted to apologize, but his instincts told him not to, and when he smelled the air he smelt the scent he knew, but wasn't sure where he had smelt it from, as his library of new enhanced smells weren't all figured out yet. "Hello Mirko-san, and yes, I and Nimari had intercourse after our session was done." The number 5 heroine smirked deeply at this new boldness the young man was showing her, definitely different from the day before. She noted as not only was his attitude different, but his body and overall aura had changed overnight. "Nice, well maybe if you're lucky I'll let you get some stress relief in after our session as well, but only if you get my engine revving, big boy." She cracked her knuckles intimidatingly, but for Izuku it made something inside of him approve immediately, a reaction that Rumi noticed but didn't bother mentioning. Almost instantly they got into a fight, but Izuku was ordered not to use the strength port of his quirk, i.e., one for all, to try and focus on the newly awakened werewolf quirk, which meant he had to take it even more seriously than he already was. Ducking under kicks and blocking those he couldn't dodge were the only options he had, as he wasn't fast enough to get past the pace Rumi had set, so in an attempt to escape her barrage of kicks he lengthened his claws, causing his fingernails to turn black and lengthen to sharp tips. Once a kick went past his head, he struck out, clawing the thigh of the dark-skinned woman, causing said woman to jump back to get away from the sharp nails, but she was a little too slow to react as 4 thin red lines bled on her thigh. "Oh, nicely done, but let's step it up a notch. Let the beast out, kid, and don't be afraid of it, so just go all out." Izuku listened to this as the number 5 hero became more serious and started hitting him with enough force to bruise his strengthened body, which had been evolved to tank strong attacks. He was forced into letting go of the control over his instincts and allow his inner animal come out and fight. Rumi noticed his new transformation quickly as the green-haired young man's eyes turned slitted and glowed blue. His forearm hair thickened, already long nails lengthened more, turning black, and looked stronger. His canines had also grown longer and sharper. "I like what I'm seeing, now get over here and fight me," shouted Rumi maniacally. The primal side of Izuku roared in response and lunged at the woman, who didn't falter under his intimidating figure. Their battle went on way longer than it was supposed to and lasted about 3 hours, making it into the afternoon. But by the end of it Izuku was extremely bloody and bruised but healing slowly. Rumi didn't have a healing factor like Izuku, so she wasn't so lucky, as she was bleeding from lots of cuts, but mainly from a large amount of claw gashes on her legs, arms, thighs, and even her ass. Yes, he had at one point slashed her on the ass, but that didn't mean she didn't retaliate for this though, as she had kicked him into one of the ceiling lights, breaking it and electrocuting him a little. But that was earlier, and as for now they just laid on the ground panting heavily in exhaustion. They were sweating buckets, and for some reason that Izuku didn't understand he felt really freaking horny. Maybe it was because he was attracted to Rumi's strength. Or was it due to his already big crush in the heroine before he had gotten into Ua? Either was plausible, or it could have been an entirely different reason for all he knew. A foot away from the teen laying on the concrete floor, Rumi grunted as she sat up, holding her side, which had a long claw mark that went from the side of her boob and down to her hip. The woman was in barely any clothing, as it had too many rips and tears to be called clothing. She looked at the young man that showed great strength and endurance and asked, "So, wanna fuck?" Yeah, time skip. So he fucked Mirko, the number 5 heroine, and his new instructor. Yeah, honestly, with how the day had been going so far, he shouldn't be surprised anymore, but for some reason he was feeling like he had forgotten something. Probably nothing. The young adult thought as he took a bite out of his Wagyu steak burger and a handful of fries. He had almost missed lunch due to his time with Rumi, but he had run straight to the cafeteria from the gym they were using to get there before lunch rush was finished cooking for the day. The cafeteria was actually pretty active today, even though it was a Sunday. In fact, there were at least double the amount of people in it than normal, causing Izuku to realize something. Isn't today parent-teacher day or something? He asked to himself, now noticing the adults are more likely parents, looking at him in ripped pants that were more like shorts and with bloodstains all over them, and of course a lot of blood caking his body. Guess that's a thing, the teen said before getting back to his food. However, when 2 people approached him, he glanced up to see not only Momo but a woman that was a few inches taller than her and with long luscious hair that hung down to her knees. Izuku gulped down the food in his mouth and waved at his first mate, his lover, his girlfriend and future wife. "Hey Momo-chan, it's good to see that you've gotten better and can walk now. Is this woman your sister by chance?" Momo blushed in embarrassment, responding while shifting her eyes from Izuku into the woman. Hello Izuku, and thank you, but actually this is my mother Shizune Yaoyorozu, an owner of the Yaoyorozu Corporation." The scruffy teen smiled innocently at the woman and greeted her. "Well, it's wonderful to meet you, Mrs. Yaoyorozu-san." Shizune smiled curtly and replied back in her deep yet feminine voice, "It's nice to meet you as well, young man, but it's miss. My husband isn't with us anymore, but more important, you are the father of my soon-to-be-born grandchildren." Record scratch. Those who were next to Izuku's table either gaped in shock at what they had heard or coughed on the food they were eating. The worst were those who had taken a sip of their drinks and did a spit take. They all turned to Izuku's table and stared at the 3. A few of the mothers leaning into each other and whispering about the juicy gossip they had just heard. On Izuku's part, he nodded and spoke. "Yes, I am Miss Yaoyorozu. I wish it was under better circumstances that we would be meeting, but I can't say I regret becoming a father to the children of myself and your daughter. Even if they were conceived while not in the right mind, I will still take full responsibility and love and support them and your daughter." Shizune smiled at this. "I see, and what do you feel for my daughter exactly?" Obviously the mother was asking this to look out for her daughter, and Izuku understood this, so answered honestly and spoke from his heart. "Well, I'd be lying if I said I didn't have a crush on her before this, and I don't know who couldn't form a crush on her with how great she is. She's not only unbelievably smart and beautiful but also a very gentle and kind person. In all honesty, I never even thought I had a chance with her, and now here I am becoming a parent with her by my side after learning of her already budding feelings for me. It's all just so amazing. I sometimes wonder to myself if I'm dreaming or something." The silence that hung throughout the entire cafeteria was all Izuku got in response, which made him nervous as he stared at the still smiling mother, which slowly started to unnerve him. But before Izuku could fully break into a sweat, Shizune turned to Momo and nodded. "I approve, but don't give me too many more grandchildren before you graduate." Momo blushed at her mother's words but nodded happily nonetheless. "Yes, mother, I'm grateful you approve of him." Shizune waved her off with a motherly smile. "Well, you can't hate me for wanting the best for my daughter now, can you? But forget that for now, Midoriya-kun, you can call me Shizune from now on." The teen blinked before he replied back, "Okay, Yar Shizune-san." The older brunette shook her head but continued to smile. "That'll have to do for now until you get more comfortable with me." The three continued to talk as Momo and Shizune sat down with Izuku at his table. The green-haired teen noticed that Momo and Shizune had plates with seafood and vegetables. He wondered if Momo's cat mutation she apparently got from her grandmother, from what she told him, had also affected her and her mother's taste in food, but when Shizune answered that it may be partly due to that but also that she just liked seafood like the majority of her family, those without cat mutations included. The hero in training jotted that down in his quirk analysis and asked Shizune about her quirk, causing the mother to giggle and Momo to blush at her lover's antics but also form a smile at his cute curiosity about quirks. The lunch had ended a little bit after, and Izuku said his goodbyes to Momo and her mother as they left to the dorms. Izuku had wanted to go train his body a bit more, but as he walked towards the gym his phone rang, causing him to stop and reach into his shredded pants to answer it. "Hello." On the other side was his mother Inko. "Izuku honey, where are you?" "I'm at your dorm building with Mitsuki, and this lovely young lady I met on the way here said you weren't here." Izuku facepalmed. How could he have forgotten that his mother would arrive on parent-teacher day? He had literally met Momo's mother and he somehow forgot that his own mother would probably be coming today as well. "Sorry mom, I forgot you'd be coming for some reason, but I'll head right over, just give me a few minutes and I'll be there soon." Inko's smile could practically be heard from the other side of the phone. "Okay honey, I'll be waiting in the common room for you." Izuku smiled unconsciously in return as he replied, "Sure thing mom, see you in a bit." He hung up the phone before full-on sprinting to the dorms, not even stopping when passing by Monoma, who was probably boasting to his parents, and it didn't take him more than a few minutes to arrive at the dorms and enter through the double doors. Upon entering, most of the occupants looked at him but only the students recognized him. But when Inko looked at the young man, she quickly noticed the fecals and familiar green hair and eyes that made her realize who he was. "Izuku!" Inko cried out. Said boy waved and greeted his mother. "Hey mom." Inko didn't wait a moment as she ran and enveloped him in a hug before holding him at arm's length and peering over his tattered shorts and bloody body. "Young man, you have a lot of explaining to do." Izuku rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly while responding. I know. To put it bluntly, I went through a change due to my quirk evolving, and my current state of dress is due to training to adapt to my new changes." The green-haired mother just gawked at what her son had said. "Izuku, how in the world would training make you?" Points at his bloody form like this. A blonde woman walked over and added on. "She's right kid, UA may be rigorous but nothing that would make you look like, well, I was gonna say terrible, but that's putting it mildly, as you look like absolute shit." Izuku turned to the blonde woman and said with an expressionless face, "Hello to you too, Aunt Mitsuki." Mitsuki rolled her eyes at the boy she saw as another son and jabbed him in the shoulder. "Yup, so anyways, what's this training that got you looking like you got into a cat fight with a lion?" The ninth user of One for All sighed before explaining. "Well, Principal Nezu called in a few favors to a couple heroes to help train me, the one to actually spar with me was the number 5 heroine Mirko, which explains my injuries, but don't worry, they're healing already. Inko perked up at the last part. What do you mean healing? And what changed with your quirk would make you grow so tall, muscular and hairy? The others in the common room who were listening were also curious at this and paid full attention on the explanation. Well, to put it bluntly, I have a transformation type mutation now that is basically a werewolf. I have a couple forms, but I have only used one so far. And finally, I have increased strength, stamina, and all of my senses are enhanced. I also have a sort of regeneration, but it still takes a while for me to heal. There is more, but I'm pretty sure Nezu would want me to keep that secret for now. Cool, said the younger brother of Suyu Asui, which broke the silence and caused everyone to start asking questions to the teen beast. But thankfully he was saved from the onslaught of questions when the doors opened to show Momo and her mother Shizune accompanied by the principal and 2 women wearing the school's PE uniform that Izuku knew all too well. Nezu, seeing everyone looking at him, gave a wave and greeted them all with his usual cheer. Greetings, you human filth, I am here to talk with Mr. Midoriya. Inko, thinking her son was in trouble, quickly asked, is there something wrong, Mr. Nezu? The chimera put his hand on his chin while thinking aloud. Depends on what your definition of wrong would be referring to. Inko blinked in confusion before her son inquired before her. I think she means if I did something that would get me in trouble or something involves me that is of importance. Ah, I see, said Nezu before turning to Inko. Well, to explain what I am referring to, yesterday your son had intercourse with a female student while under the influence of his rutting cycle or heat cycle due to his quirk evolving. Now this isn't really a problem, as from recovery girls' tests show that any female he gets pregnant will give birth in a week at most, so no real need to expel the female or take them out of the hero course as I've made preparations already. However, earlier today he had a few hiccups. Izuku's mother almost fainted at hearing this news but just barely stayed conscious at hearing the last part. What do you mean by hiccups? Nezu's smile grew at hearing this and answered, why, of course I mean that Izuku has. He was stopped mid-sentence as the doors burst open to reveal a panting and sweaty recovery girl who gasped, trying to catch her breath. The group let her do so, and after a minute and a cup of water later from Momo, she looked at Nimari and Rumi, who were wearing PE clothes, with nervous looks. Chio sighed in disappointment before turning to Nezu. Sir, I forgot to inform you that Mirko was starting her heat cycle and shouldn't be around Midoriya just yet since they'd most likely reproduce. However, it seems I'm already too late. Nezu nodded to this while Inko fully fainted and was caught by Mitsuki, who was laughed hysterically. Meanwhile the rest just stared between Izuku and the 2 women in tracksuits. Yet it was only Momo that seemed to be fine with this new information, maybe because Izuku was her alpha and mate. Well, she didn't really know, but for some reason she was alright with this. While Momo was contemplating her inner feelings, very unluckily for Izuku was being approached by a true beast. Shizune was not so keen on this news and said as much when she appeared next to the wolf teen and gripped his shoulder in a vice grip. Midoriya-kun, would you kindly explain what that rat is referring to? Izuku on his part paled dramatically and gulped. Fuck. Things got out of hand rather quickly, with Momo's mother strapping Izuku to a chair, and off to the side Izuku saw Inko crying a river while hugging Momo, Rumi and Nimari. But Izuku was more focused on the woman in front of him who was glaring. Do you want to explain yourself, young man? Izuku gulped but also felt his primal urge to defy Momo's mother. Thankfully, due to Ryuko's training, he was able to calm his inner wolf and reply normally. I'm sorry I fucked Nimari and Rumi, but they asked for it. Okay. He was officially fucked and it was all his stupid brain's fault. However, before Momo's mother could kill and or castrate him, Momo got between Izuku and her mother. Shizune's eyes glared at her daughter before softening slightly. Momo, father to your child or not, I must punish this boy for doing this to you, so please move. Momo shook hearing her mother's dead serious tone, but the younger Yaoyorozu stood her ground. Mother, I don't blame Izuku for this, and if you'd let me explain I can tell you why. The mother stared at her daughter for a full minute before responding. You have a minute before I make him suffer. Go on, dear, explain why I shouldn't harm this cheating scumbag. In relief, Momo let out a shuddering breath and quickly explained. Izuku isn't in control of his actions with his new quirk activating. That's how he got me pregnant in the first place. Now him having intercourse with Miss Midnight and Mirko is shocking. It's not like I didn't see it coming. and in fact I don't mind as I am bisexual and am proud of it. Quote. So, in other words, you want him to form a harem of women he can impregnate whenever he wants? Asked Shizune in bewilderment. Momo blushed deeply as she twiddled her thumbs. Why yes, I guess I do. It was pure silence until it was broken by the father of Uraraka, who was eating popcorn with the rest of the parents off to the side. Damn, he's living the dream, ain't he? The other fathers nodded before getting slapped or punched by their partners. Momo and Shizune looked over at them and facepalmed at realizing that they weren't alone and had just shown family drama to them all. Does this mean I can get untied now? Asked the wolf man, feeling the rope's chafe on his wrist. Shizune glared at him for a second before sighing and cutting the ropes off of him. Fine. You've been excused this time, but if you ever hurt my daughter in any way I will kill you. Not torture, kill. Izuku gulped and wiped the sweat from his brow. Why yes ma'am. Inko walked over to him with the new additions to Izuku's love life. Both heroines were still a little sheepish as they greeted him. Izuku, these girls are so beautiful. I'm so happy to see I'll be getting more grandbabies soon. Inko said with tears still falling from her eyes in happiness. The teen wolf smiled at his mother and two women that he breed recently. I am to mom, but I would also like for you to meet Momo's mother, who is the CEO of Yaoyorozu Company, along with her husband being the main executive of the company. Inko treated the mother of her future daughter-in-law and grabbed the three pregnant girls and one young man, dragging them over to the table with surprising strength. They were sat down and Izuku could hear the other parents and the rest of the class snickering at him being manhandled with his impressive size. He sighed when he saw his mother take out the photo album from his childhood and started showing the others. In all honesty, he should have expected it when he heard it was family day. Inko showed a particularly embarrassing photo to Rumi, who snorted and looked in his direction, but upon making eye contact she went fully red-faced and shot her eyes down to her lap. Huh. Seems Rumi is more docile now that she's becoming a mother. Wait, how would her quirk react to my advanced pregnancy aspect? Would she give birth quicker or have more than one baby on average? As Izuku was lost in thought just a little ways behind him, Kyoka spoke aloud. Do you think he'll get any more girls in his harem? Denki, who was nearby, shrugged. Probably. After all, I know you like him and so does AHK. Kyoka jabbed him in the ear with her jacks as her face was enveloped in a cherry pink blush. Don't say that out loud, you idiot. Besides Kyoka was her mother Mika Jiro, who smirked at her little girl. And what might this be? Do my eyes deceive me, or is my little girl into the tall hunky wolf? The punk girl blushed deeper and groaned into her hands. Mom. Mika giggled at her daughter's behavior. Don't be like that. From what we've seen so far, he may just eat you up without even trying. Mom. I'm not gonna fuck Izuku. Oh, so you call him by his given name? Mika countered. Fuck this. The purple-haired girl stomped off and towards Momo in the couch, wanting to be with her best friend to get away from her mother's teasing. Giggling, Mika looked to her side towards Kaminari's mother, who was staring at Izuku dumbly. Quirking her eyebrow, Mika leaned in and asked, "See something you like?" Kaminari blushed at being caught but didn't stop her gazing at the young man who her son had told her so much about. She licked her lips and replied back boldly, "Yes, and I think I may just go take a bite given time." Mika blinked in surprise before shrugging. "Good for you, I guess. I would too if I wasn't happily married." Kami nodded and started speaking to Mika, not noticing her son Denki go wide-eyed and paper white at the thought of his friend and classmate becoming his new father figure. Time skip. The family day was going in full swing. Rumi and Nimari had somewhat gotten out of their shyness and were acting more like their usual selves, minus the few times they would blush and look at Izuku lovingly whenever they saw him. Everyone noticed how they were acting and wondered if Izuku was so good in bed he could make women fall in love with him on the first go of things. From what they were seeing, that just may be the case. Although some of the girls were glancing at him too, which was noticed. Uraraka, Toru, Sue and Kyoka were the most discreet at it, but then there was Mina, who straight up ogled and shyly groped him, much to her mother's surprise. Mina's mother, who was a biologist, took note of her daughter awful flirting with the scruffy teen. The way Mina would hug him or awkwardly drag her hand up and down his arm were strange in her mother's eyes. Alexandria Ashido was a woman of logic and facts, way different from her ex-husband, who Mina happened to get her personality from. So seeing her usually boisterous daughter act so meek and shy with her affection was very surprising to her. Alexandria wasn't the only one to notice their daughters acting differently around Izuku. Uraraka's mother, Tsuyu's mother and Tori's mother also noticed. Each of them felt curious at their daughter's infatuation but didn't feel against letting them pursue the young man that apparently snagged the heart of 3 women, maybe more. They did however wonder if he had the stamina to compensate for so many girls in his life. Meanwhile with Izuku and his girls, the teen was sighing at his mother's actions that were embarrassing him. Inko had moved on from the pictures and was now talking to the girls about possible kid names for the babies. Momo had blushed as red as her hero outfit when asked this, with Nimari and Rumi reacting similarly but lessened as they weren't being watched like a hawk from their mother unlike Momo was. The Ravenet had suggested the name Selena for a girl and Michael for a boy. Rumi had admitted she liked the names Scarlet and Adam, and when it was Nimari's turn to say her names she blushed and spoke quietly to the point no one heard her. "What did you say, Nimari?" asked Izuku as he leaned into her side and put his hand on her lower part of her back in a sign of reassuring her. Blushing again, Nimari spoke, but this time loud enough for them all to hear. "I want to name my daughter Hera or Hestia, and my son will be Percy, short for Perseus." Many raised an eyebrow at this, Izuku included, the lycanthrope asking the question on their minds, "Aren't those Greek names?" Nimari leaned into his touch as she explained with a far-off look, "I lived in Athens growing up before moving in my early teenage years. When I was younger I had aunts and uncles on my mother's side who were all named after Greek gods. I am the same. For instance, I am named after one for my middle name, which is Aphrodite, and I want my children to keep that tradition going." "I didn't know you were Greek, but that name does suit you, Nimari. You absolutely fit the criteria to be a goddess of beauty," said Izuku truthfully. Nimari blushed harder and turned to bury her face into his chest. She wouldn't deny it, but his words made her heart leap into her throat and her face to form a wide smile. Over on the other side of the couch, Inko started crying full force again, the tears shooting off and hitting anyone nearby, which just so happened to be the Iida family. Rumi and Momo smiled at the scene, thinking how wonderful of a man Izuku was and how lucky they were to have him as theirs, and laughed at the unfortunate Iida family who were now soaked head to toe in tears. Later in the evening, the parents said goodbye to their children before heading home, with the last being Inko, who made dinner for the class. She had insisted on doing this much, at least much to Izuku's dismay. Yet now the short woman was being escorted by his mentor All Might to take her home. Izuku didn't know why he insisted on All Might, but for he had an inkling that for some reason his inner wolf was howling to keep her protected by having her guarded by the strongest individual he knew. He chalked it up to his new instincts and walked back into the dorms, and walking up to his room, he waved to the stragglers who were going to stay up a little longer, but Izuku wasn't one of them as he was tired mentally from all that had transpired recently. So ascending the stairs, Izuku went to his room. The door opened easily enough, but Izuku wasn't ready for what lay inside for him. Inside his room was completely different looking from this morning. The room itself looked to be expanded and the furniture had been switched out with new paint on the walls. Speaking of walls, the previously covered walls of All Might merch was gone and replaced by a stone-like paneling, the floor now covered in carpet. In all actuality it looked great, minus the fact his merch was gone, and of course the fact the bed was fixed from how he had broken it the night before was nice too. It also seemed it was bigger, nearly the size of Momo's if he was gauging it right. "What happened to my room?" he asked aloud. Nimari, who was in a large dark purple t-shirt, black panties and her red glasses, answered, "Nezu had Smintos fix the place earlier today and moved your merchandise to go with your mother since she was coming over for the day." "Huh," and the room seemingly expanding. It was Momo who answered this time. "I have been moved into your room, so Mineta switched with me and I took where his room was and added that space into yours. I also sent the belongings that I didn't need back home using a moving company." Izuku nodded softly to this. "Okay, is there anything else I should know that changed in my room?" Momo nodded excitedly and got up from the bed, showing off her black nightgown. She walked over to a table and shelf. "This is where we can do homework. The bookshelf has enough room for all our books and notebooks, as you can see, and my favorite part is this." She opened what seemed to Izuku like a wooden box, but the said box opened up to show a record player with a music disc already set inside. Momo had turned it on and placed the needle on the record, which started playing music. Surprised by this, Izuku smiled at the cool retro piece of music media. It also helped that the music that played was tasteful and nice to hear in his enhanced ears. He turned to Momo and thanked her with a smile. "It's wonderful, Momo, I love it." Momo blushed and pushed a piece of her hair behind her ear as she responded, Thank you, but that's not all. Moving over to the other side of the room was a small lounge area with a couch and a couple of beanbags, and right behind the couch was another slim table that had a projector for when they wanted to watch movies or TV shows. It would project them into the wall in front of the couch. Izuku absolutely loved it and kissed Momo on the lips as a thank you, but they weren't done. Apparently Momo found out about Izuku's secret appreciation of coffee and showed him a custom coffee maker with a similar tea set next to it so they could both make and enjoy their favorite drinks together. The wolf man fully hugged Momo and picked her up in the air before kissing her on the lips this time, and once the kiss was broken and Izuku sat her back down on her feet, the heiress was mentally gone completely, giggling with a dazed expression plastered on her face. Rumi, who was in the closet, came out without a bra and was only in red panties, raised an eyebrow at seeing the two. What's up with the cat? Nimari answered this with a smirk at the bold display. Oh, nothing, just Izuku pampering Momo for doing nice things for him. The rabbit heroine let out a soft, huh, as she looked at the heiress. She then turned to Izuku and looked him up and down, smirked at seeing him ogle her breast. So you gonna stand around all night or come to bed? Rubbing the back of his head, Izuku apologized for staring at her. Sorry, let me get out of these clothes and I'll meet you in a second. Rumi purred from deep in her throat at hearing this, and before Izuku could comment on it, she hopped onto the bed and quickly got under the covers. Her head popped out a second later from under the covers as she waited for him to join her. Izuku, who had seen the entire thing, could think only one thing: how is she so cute? He stood like that for a solid few seconds before he shook his head and walked into the new walk-in closet and searched for clothing to wear to bed. He didn't have anything that would suit him for bed, so he instead undressed until he was only in his boxers briefs. After throwing his other clothes into his dirty clothes hamper, he exited the closet to see Nimari and Momo also under the bed sheets. They seemingly had joined Rumi while he was in there. He smiled at the sight of his mates laying in his bed with room saved for him in the center. Walking over to them and entered the empty space he was immediately latched onto, with Rumi claiming his chest with the other two grabbing his arms. Blinking at the new sensation of laying with multiple people in bed, Izuku got over it quickly and pecked each of them on the forehead. He also asked Momo to turn the lights off as Rumi had already got comfortable pressing her breast against his upper abs, which Momo did, and turned the record player off as well before joining them back in bed. I love you, Rumi, Momo, Nimari, Izuku said with a loving tone in his voice. The three women kissed him on the lips in return for his words and responded with an I love you too, each. Izuku closed his eyes after this and hugged them all closer towards himself before drifting off into slumber, going unnoticed by them, the tattoos on Nimari and Rumi glowing softly as they slowly started evolving in their sleep. Inside One for All, our green-haired protagonist appeared back within his quirk world, the ever-black void coming to be a familiar to the teen at this point. But there was just one problem. The void had changed. The blackness of the void was now sprinkled with white stars, clouds and four moons of various colors and sizes, the biggest of them being a greenish hue with the other three orbiting it. That's new, if you haven't noticed, said the ever-familiar voice of Nana, the seventh One for All user. Turning behind him, Izuku saw Nana and Yoichi there, seemingly expecting him by how they stood just a foot away of his spawning point. Whatever he would call the place he appeared when coming into On for All. Yeah, I've noticed, but it seems that's not all that's changed, state the teen wolf. Nana nodded at his assessment. So you've noticed, it's a lot better than the old slab of concrete if I do say so myself. Behind her and Yoichi was a large cabin with an almost ominous woodland surrounding it, and behind Izuku where he was originally looking was a large lake filled with black water that shimmered with the reflection of the stars and moons. Nice, well if you like horror movie cabin in the woods type that is, said Izuku while glancing at the ominous woodlands. Yoichi shivered at that. Don't get me started on when this place originally changed to this. I almost shat myself thinking I had gone to hell until Nana smacked me out of my shock. Izuku's sweat dropped at that. I didn't need to know that, but while I'm here, why don't you explain how me and Momo are connected since you didn't get to last time? Nana shrugged and started walking. Sure, let's talk while we walk. They started walking down the dirt path heading to the cabin and Yoichi started to explain. So basically we can feel her life force, I guess is the best way of putting it. we can sorta sense where she is. We found that out when you separated from her earlier today. We could still tell where she was the entire day." Izuku rubbed his chin hearing this. "That'll be useful for hero work. What else did you notice?" Yoichi stepped over a stick as he started speaking again. "We aren't sure, but with those other 2 moons appearing when you mated with those 2 women, nice work with that by the way." Izuku blushed and Yoichi quickly moved on. "Anyway, as I was saying, we are now connected to those 2 girls through those moons and have felt a slight change since they joined us. Like a new power is emerging from the energy they have given one for all since joking or something. We don't really know if you'll start getting their quirks like you or ours, or if it will affect their quirks by empowering and changing them before giving them to you, or maybe it's something else entirely. We won't really know until it happens." Yoichi and the others reached the door and opened it to reveal the inside of the cabin. Banjo was sitting in the couch with the only other occupant being En, who was drinking a glass of scotch. Waving to them, Izuku greeted, "Hey guys." Banjo looked his way and waved back while En nodded in Izuku's direction. The team then turned back to Yoichi asking a question that plagued his mind since last night. "Yoichi-san, what happened to the wolf from the last time I was here?" The white-haired man frowned at this. "To be perfectly honest with you, we don't know. The place changed after you touched it with a bright light enveloping everything, blinding us for a few seconds, and by the time our eyesight had returned it was gone without a trace." Izuku stared at Yoichi in surprise, but deep down he felt the wolf was still there, watching him and waiting for him, and Banjo attested to this. "I saw something out in the woods earlier today, just around the time you were fighting that rabbit chick. I say it's waiting for you to go full wolf mode until it'll show itself to you in here, in a type of showing you got the balls or whatever to show it who's boss." Banjo's words, for how baseless they were, still felt truthful, and Izuku could sense he was mostly right. The beast wanted Izuku to be ready for when it would show itself, but he didn't know what it would intend to do when it did. He didn't know how he knew this to be the case, but he didn't need to. One for All was a mystery in itself, and this was just one of many mysteries to come when it came to this quirk and its inner workings. So with a sigh, Izuku went over to the couch and flopped onto it. He rested his eyes for a second and let out a deep breath to relax as Nana sat next to him, putting a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's gonna be fine, kid. So relax for now and start thinking about all the ladies you'll be betting soon. My money is on the dragon woman being the next to be claimed," Nana said with a completely straight face. Banjo barked a laugh at this, slapping his knee in doing so. "Ha! Don't make me laugh. The 9th is definitely gonna go for the rocker girl with the ox cord earlobes next." Nana pouted and glared at the bald man. "The hell he is, dragon girl all the way. Rocker girl, dragon girl, rocker girl, dragon girl. Enough," shouted Yoichi, getting between the 2 who had stood up and started grabbing at each other. The 7th and the 5th users stopped fighting and turned to Yoichi, the white-haired man looking them dead in the eyes. He spoke. "He's gonna get with the pink-haired girl from the support course anyway, so quit your petty fighting because you're both wrong." "Oh, fuck off, screw off," the bald and female users shouted at the audacity of the first user. Meanwhile, Izuku, who had moved over to sit with En's side, En, seeing his discomfort, offered him a glass of scotch. Izuku, seeing the glass, looked up to En with a raised eyebrow, mentally asking if he could even taste anything while inside One for All. En, however, shrugged and pushed it towards him. The scruffy young man shrugged before taking the glass and sipping from it, the burning sensation of the alcohol surpassing him, but then turning into curiosity at how the hell that even worked. The 2 continued to drink from there onward, completely ignoring the 3 others behind them who had started a fist fight with each other, Banjo getting punched in the nose, breaking it 1 second, then Nana getting kicked in the kidney and Yoichi getting thrown through the coffee table the next. "Are they always like this?" Izuku asked, hoping that wasn't the case. En responses was a simple shrug, which Izuku took as a, "Probably, but I don't know. I'm an introvert, so I don't hang with them that much." With that said, the 2 continued ignoring the others and enjoying each other's quiet company. The morning was pretty exciting, unless with the girls getting ultrasounds to see the babies. Much to his own embarrassment, Izuku had cried the same waterfall tears like his mother had done last night, which made the girls laugh in amusement. And it was confirmed that Rumi, despite getting pregnant after Momo would give birth before her due to her rabbit quirk, Izuku did notice that the girls had acted not the way he expected them to during the procedure. Rumi was meek and cried silently with a wobbly smile. She had confessed to him after the appointment that she never thought she'd get herself a man or a child, since in Japan muscular women weren't sought outright like in other countries due to their own standards for beauty, and her personality wasn't appealing to most people either. He had comforted her with a kiss and held her tightly while telling her how beautiful she was and how stupid others must have been to miss out on such a wonderful woman. He could barely control his anger at some of the stories she told him about people ridiculing her body and dream of being a hero with her quirk. Nimari's reaction was just as teary-eyed but was more emotional, as she couldn't form words properly to speak to him. The only words that Izuku was just barely able to understand were, "I love you," and "they're so beautiful." The last was Momo, who was silently smiling throughout the entire operation until she laid eyes on their children, yes, children, as she was having twins. Speaking of the amount of children, Nimari had the least amount with only one child, and the most went to Rumi with quadruplets. He had choked on his own spit when that piece of news was given to him. If Inko had been there, Izuku doubted the school would be safe from her tears. Heki almost flooded the nurse's office after hearing the news and made the water rise to ankle height in the matter of seconds. Besides that shocking news, there was one last major change to come to the newly formed Midoriya family, that being Nimari and Rumi's quirk change, or evolution in this case. The rated R heroine changed somewhat physically. She looked younger and her body was measured to be in her early 20s with larger breast and, in Izuku's own words, had childbearing hips. Her quirk had also changed considerably. She could now control her smoke in density, making it visible or not, and could control it directly like a form of telekinesis. Rumi's was physical in nature. Her leg muscles grew larger yet more compact as her strength had doubled or maybe even tripled. Secondly, her senses were now sharper than they already were. All of this came to their attention after some tests they took to see how Izuku's evolution aspect affected them. The shocked expressions were the icing on the cake, not only for Izuku but for Nezu, who had came to talk to him personally. The news made him cackle madly. They were so loud that they could be heard throughout the school, scaring all those on campus and some just walking outside of it. The cackling only ended when Recovery Girl got tired of hearing it and tried hitting Nezu with her cane, but it was just barely avoided, with Nezu jumping out of its way right when it was going to hit him. The principal had made his usually introduction before telling Izuku that he would now only be taking lessons with Yukio, as his previous trainers were out of commission for the time being. They all blushed at that, Izuku having it the worst, as Izuku looked at him dead in the eye as he said it, and the glare Chio was giving him wasn't helping either. Apparently that was all Nezu had to say, so he left promptly after, but not before mentioning that his training with Yukio would be starting in half an hour. Izuku nodded to that information before walking his partners back to the dorms, where his mother, to his surprise, was standing there waiting for them. A quick conversation later, she had basically explained that she'd help the girls while he was getting training for the time being until they gave birth. He was a little reluctant at first, but after some pushing from Nimari and Momo and Inko saying that Nezu would be paying her for the service, he agreed and left them in his mother's hands, giving them a goodbye kiss before he went to the gym to meet with the Dragoness. The training session started at 9:20, and when he arrived it was around 9:17, so he was a few minutes early, which seemed to make Yukio happy at seeing his professionalism. "Good, you're here early. That shows you've learned from yesterday's ordeal," Yukio said while approaching him. Izuku nodded and smelled her perfume as she walked towards him, the unique smell of a campfire and a hint of sweet pineapple. If Yukio noticed his reaction, she did not point it out, and instead laid out the training plan for them before starting their session. They got right down to business after that, with Ryuko, as she made him call her, had him start leading to use his nose to track scents. For some odd reason, however, he continued to smell the same honey-like sweet smell from the previous day that he still hadn't figured out. Strangely enough, it was only ever coming from woman. It was mixed into Ryuko's natural scent, so he guessed it was a scent that came from woman specifically. However, this wouldn't make sense, as his mother and a few other women he had been near didn't smell like this. He decided to store that question for later, or maybe ask Ryuko about it when they were done training for the day, so with that out of the way, he did as was asked of him for the task at hand. Time skip. After 2 hours of his scent and hearing training, they pushed on to the combat portion of the day. Ryuko turned into her full dragon form and Izuku into his wolfman form. The only rules are don't hold back, but only use your werewolf quirk, not the one that crushes buildings in one blow and ends up with a broken arm. Am I clear? The regal-looking dragon spoke. Izuku nodded. Crystal, I'm ready when you are, ma'am. Ryuko nodded and got into her dragon's fang fighting style she used while in dragon form. Izuku himself got into an improved style of his own that he created the other day while fight Rumi. They clashed a second later in the center of the gym, the shockwave echoing and kicking up air. Izuku had to immediately dodge heavy attacks from Ryuko's enlarged hands and feet, while also dishing out some heavy slashes and kicks of his own. The entire fight was like an explosion of force, with the gym looking like a war zone from their clashes after a few minutes. One time Izuku even bit into the dragoness with enough force to pierce her hard scales and cause her to bleed on her left shoulder. She had let out a defending roar at that, which for some reason caused an abundance of adrenaline to enter his veins, as if getting ready for whatever came next. And his body was right, as for the first time Ryuko got serious in the battle, her instincts starting to take over and become more brutal. Her attacks became quicker and more dangerous as claws met flesh in his chest, arms and other body parts of his, causing major bleeding and blood to coat the gym floor. However, his regeneration seemed to kick into overdrive or spontaneously become stronger as the attacks landed on him, and as he was forced into the wall, something deep inside of him roared out. This would be the first ever time his form changed to the more well-known werewolf form that people thought of when they heard of werewolves. His bones snapped and realigned so fast it sounded like gunshots going off. His skin darkened and hair grew rapidly, but the most atrocious part of the transformation was his face. His eyes bled as his irises changed completely and the color became a dreadfully icy blue. His teeth jutted out, sharpening and realigning themselves to fit his newly formed canine maw. What was left to transform was his finger digits, which popped and cracking as they lengthened to become sharpened tools of death, the black nails having becoming the length of steak knives that glistened in the light. The transformation finished with a howl that's pitch tore through the air, reaching far out to the point it reached the ears of those miles out of the campus and throughout the city. Ryuko, who had watched the entire thing, was in a frenzy-like state now. Her scales shifted, flexing, and they bristled from the absolute pack leader Alpha that had just declared himself superior in front of her. The remaining consciousness of her mind had been overshadowed by her more bestial subconscious. Her inner dragon, now in full control, lowered her serpentine head close to the ground while growling at the wolf and raising its wings out wide in a show of defiance. The wolf, who had finished howling, didn't like this act. Izuku was still there and still somewhat in control, but his inner beast was roaring at him to put the dragoness under him and in her place as his mate, as part of his pack. But most importantly, under him. So he growled back and similarly lowered himself into an attack stance. They both stayed stock still, burrowing holes into the other with chilling glares. And then, like a rubber band snapping, they were off. Izuku, being faster, got under the dragon and tackling the abdomen of the reptilian creature. The dragon in turn roared in anger before taking to the skies and going through the roof. The wolf didn't let go of the flying reptile as its jaw and claws dug into the belly of the beast, tearing through its scales easily. A few minutes earlier, Rumi was sitting on the couch with her mother on the phone. She had given the news to her mother, Yuri Usagiyama, about her becoming a mother soon and getting into a relationship with a guy she met recently and liked a lot. Her mother had been ecstatic, not even caring about Izuku's age or his quirk being the cause of the union. Instead, she focused on the good parts, which were the fact she was going to be a grandmother and going to have multiple grandchildren in the matter of less than a week. They had talked about baby names when it happened. Rumi's ears went completely straight and the hair on the back of her neck stood on end just a second before the roar of an alpha boomed throughout the air and lingering for what felt like ages. The mate mark on Rumi's inner thigh had started to glow and heat up, telling her that this was her mate, her pack leader, and he was showing dominance over a woman who was trying to defy his rule. Yuri, who was still on the phone, spoke through heavy and exhausting breaths, her chest pounding at the dominance of the roar that made her fear the worst less than our Rumi. What's going on? Who is that? Greater than? Rumi blinked her eyes, her mother's words taking her out of her stupor, and as the roar faded she responded, "My alpha, he's fighting to show dominance. I have to go, I'll talk to you later." Less than but Rumi, what do I to her mother just barely got out before Rumi hung up and jumped from her spot on the couch. Before she could start rushing to the door, Nimori and Momo appeared from the kitchen and looked at her. They met eyes and didn't need to speak to convey that they all heard Izuku's roar and were going to him. They rushed out of the double doors seconds later with a distraught and confused Inko following them as best as she could, the short woman having no idea what was going on but content to follow the group of girls in case they needed her, or the other way around. But they weren't the only ones to go to Izuku. His alpha call had affected all of those with mutation quirks of animal nature, so Tsuyu, Shishida, Pony, Setsuna, Juzo, and even Nezu had gotten up from their respective desks to run towards the alpha. It was a little shocking for Class 1B who were in the middle of class to see 4 of their students get up after the roar and run out of the classroom. Vlad had decided to follow them and allow the rest of his class to do the same. Nezu, who was in a meeting with most of the staff besides Aizawa and Vlad, obviously, the former who had something out of the school to attend, so he had snipe watch over his students. Those in the meeting had seen their principal bristle uncomfortably. Almost immediately Nezu hopped onto Power Loader's shoulder and ordering him to run and follow his directions. "Sir, what are you?" Smintos was cut off by the roar that shook them at its volume and intensity, which in turn caused them to worry and do as Nezu said, running out of the meeting room and off in the direction of the gym without knowing it. They eventually all converged together in front of the gym just to see Yukio smash through the roof and fly up into the air with an unknown creature latched onto her midsection and was making her bleed. What the hell is that thing and what is it doing to Yukio?" yelled out Denki in fear. Most were fearful, but the mutant quirk users knew immediately who it was, Tsuyu looking on in awe and answering the blonde's inquiry, "That's Izu-chan Kiro." The others who didn't know turned to her in surprise before quickly glancing back at the dragon and apparent werewolf fighting in the air, progressively going higher into the air as the seconds ticked by. "No way, that's Izuku, bro, so manly," Hiroshima said, which made Mina punch his shoulder due to the inappropriate timing. The hardening user flinched, not seeing the punch coming. He rubbed the arm before asking, "What was that for? It really is manly." Mina gave him a deadpanned look. "Our classmate is fighting the number 7 hero, in some sort of animalistic rage, and you're saying that's manly? Will you hit me if I say yes?" Mina facepalmed and turned back to the fight. Izuku and Yukio having gone so high there was no doubt they couldn't have been seen from the city. Hiroshima, however, wasn't alone in thinking Izuku looked absolutely badass. Setsuna, who had a minor reptilian part to her quirk, was amazed beyond belief at her reaction to his call, but what's more was the feelings she was experiencing in his presence. It was warm and inviting, which made her want to talk to the boy she hadn't even met before this. She was one of many women who felt something for the werewolf in action. Momo, his first mate, had her cat tail wagging like a dog with excitement, with a blush at seeing her alpha fighting for dominance over the dragon-quirked woman. Rumi and Nimari were similar in that regard. The rabbit heroine a bit more, as Ryuko was her best friend and they mutually had feelings for one and another. But for years now they both knew they needed to fulfill their inner animal's desire for an alpha before settling down. This fight for dominance would make or break it if Rumi and Ryuko could be together or not, and from the looks of it they would be together from here on out. They watched on as the fight became more bloody, more heat, as Izuku's claws allowing him to climb and maneuver around the body of the dragon to the point he reached her wings. He grabbed them with a strong grip, with his claws digging into her flesh as he bit down on the appendages, making the dragon roar in pain once again before the wings stopped flapping and they started plummeting towards the earth. Worry filled the air in the audience they had, the floor meeting them faster than they thought they could survive. Only a few seconds later did the two land in the courtyard of the school, where Ryuko reluctantly untransformed out of her dragon form and into her human one from the damage done to her, the group of watchers running over to the crater they had made when landing. Izuku, despite what many would think was as right as rain beside the visibly broken arm with its bone jutting out, the students and his mother gagging at the sight. Monoma even puked upon seeing it. However, said injury healed in seconds, the bone snapping loudly back in place to the astonished crowd's shock. The werewolf stood on his hind legs, walking towards the dragoness, who grunting in effort to stand as he stalked over to her. Toshinori Yagi, who was on scene with the teachers, decided he should end this before Ryuko was hurt any more by Izuku. The number 1 hero approached, much to the crowd's surprise and verbal discouragement, and their worry was well placed because what happened next was astonishing in its own right. "Young Midoriya, I think that's a new." Toshinori was caught in the face by the back of Izuku's transformed hand, nicking him with his claws as the hit connected. Toshinori, in his 600 pounds all-might form, being just a little smaller than Izuku, was sent flying back and through a few concrete pillars until he met the steel wall bordering the school, and going through even that. The audience gasped from the unexpected action, though it seemed Izuku didn't even acknowledge it as he finally reached Ryuko and leaned towards her, growling deeply into her ear. The dragon heroine tried to move in defiance still but was stopped quickly by Izuku's hand pushing her into the crater she had made when falling. He growled more until she stopped trying to get up and stayed perfectly still with a whimper. Once her defeat was shown by this sign of obedience, Izuku stopped his growling and blew air out of his snout, right before he sunk his teeth into her shoulder, causing the two classes, heroes, mates and mother, to gasp once again. The bite drew blood, and after a few seconds he stopped and took a step back to see the bite, which slowly formed into another of his marks, and announcing that she fell to his might and was his mate for life. Once the mark formed fully, Ryuko let out a sigh of what seems to be relief, probably at finally finishing the battle portion of the ritual of making him her alpha and her his mate. But the hulking form of the werewolf didn't disappear into Izuku's normal form. No, the beast gently picked the woman up into his strong, powerful arms and started carrying her towards the direction of the dorms. The others blinked at what had happened before it all registered, Rumi smiling at the ending with Momo and Nimari following her reaction, yet Bakugo being himself was the most vocal of the audience. Did shitty Deku just bitch slap All Might and then go off to carry his prize to his bedroom to fuck her? I am not gonna lie, that's pretty hot. Setsuna chastised Abara in disbelief. The lizard-splitting girl turned and addressed her friend. What? It was hot and you can't deny that. Besides, it's natural in the animal kingdom for the alpha to fight for dominance. This is no different. Abara stared at her classmate in bewilderment before the principal spoke up. She is right. That was textbook animal kingdom behavior, and Yuki's defiance was nothing more than a challenge to see if Izuku was indeed strong enough to be with her romantically. The fight may have been bloody, but they both consented, or else they would have ended up killing each other in the end. But Principal Nezu, this is an unholy union of the most debaucherous nature, and he physically hurt her. That's not right. Nezu shrugged, with his fur finally starting to relax and flatten. Well, if you have any problems with it, then please refer to his mates and mother. He pointed to Rumi, Nimari and Momo, whose stomachs were sticking out due to their pregnant stomachs starting to show from their shirt clinging to them and being in their later months of pregnancy already. Abara's face became completely pale and she started praying with the same speeds as Izuku's mumbling. Meanwhile, the rest of her class that didn't know anything about Izuku's most recent changes and escapades were slack-jawed. Even Vlad, who was a teacher, hadn't heard of this and quickly asked to know what the actual fuck was going on. Nezu laughed at their surprised expressions before going into full detail about what had occurred this past couple days in Class 1A. While this was all being said, All Might walked over to them with the help of Snipensman Toss. His thoughts, even while a little concussed, were of surprise and joy at his successor. Holy cow, young Midoriya, you hit like a tank. And I've actually been shot with one of those with my training under Gran Torino. We should spar more often if you're at that stage in strength already. While All Might was coming to terms with his pupil's newly acquired strength, he didn't take into account one major detail. There was no energy from One for All in that attack. That was purely enhanced base strength form, his werewolf form, meaning he had truly created a monster for a successor without even knowing it. Meanwhile, Aizawa walked through the front gates and walked down the path leading to the main building, but upon seeing them all and the massive crater, he walked up and asked, "What happened here, and shouldn't you all be in class?" They all turned to the man, who looked more dead and tired than usual. Present Mike was the one who answered while rubbing his neck. "I don't think you want to know right now, so we'll let you in on it all during a meeting later today and after you get some sleep in." Nimari raised a brow at this meeting she wasn't aware of. What meeting? Present Mike glanced to her and spoke with a blank face. The meeting that will eventually happen, due to the fact we need to adjust our plans for the sports festival, which is tomorrow, I might add, and speak about all of this and how to address it better. He said the last part, pointing to the crater. No one could retort his words and just nodded in understanding. Aizawa, however, raised an eyebrow before shaking his head and walking to the main building to get some sleep in before this mystery meeting. He could feel this all was his problem child's doing, and he dared to hope it wasn't the case. This left the others to walk aimlessly back to classes after being dismissed. They each were wondering how strong Izuku truly was, and or how the hell he got 3 women pregnant in the span of 2 days. With Izuku, the bed creaked, the bed frame slammed into the wall with enough force to almost crack it, but the newly enforced walls stood firm under the abuse from the wolf and dragon mating. Izuku was still in his werewolf form and Ryuko in her human one. She had tried to turn into her dragon a couple times but was stopped with some nipping bites to her ears or neck. basically telling her to not try and fight him anymore and that he had won, but to his surprise it seemed she liked his bites from how she tried to get out of his grasp and moaned in pleasure from each nip at her skin. They went at it for some time, not even noticing when Momo, Rumi and Nimari got into the room and started to watch, waiting for their pack leader to finish his demonstration of dominance over the newly marked mate, their new sister in motherhood to their alpha. If Izuku wasn't in a haze of heat, he'd have pondered if she'd lay an egg or not. He would have also stopped to get her medical attention for the cuts and bites, but the bloody and slightly injured form of his new lover was too enticing to his predator-like eyes, showing he had utterly dominated her. The mating lasted for a full hour until he finished and his transformation undid itself, leaving a panting and sweating Izuku in its wake. Breathing roughly and with a husky voice, Izuku addressed the three who had been patiently waiting for him. "You girls want to turn to right?" Momo, Rumi and Nimari blushed but nodded nonetheless, all three of them getting aroused by the display of their lover in action and at his peak. Izuku, seeing his mates wanting some love themselves, got up and got some snacks and a water bottle before consuming them quickly, and with some fuel in his body he turned back to the three and spoke one last time. "Get on the bed, we'll go until you're satisfied and I've fully devoured you three." The girls vibrated in euphoria at hearing his words, laced with sensual affection directed solely at them and making their hormones flood their bodies. They all did as he ordered, with Izuku getting ready for another session of passionate love-making that would last the whole rest of the day. None of them knowing that someone passing by the school earlier had seen and recorded the whole fight Izuku had with Ryuko in the air, and the most important part being the hit that made All Might fly and need help to get back up again before they left to not get caught. This news would hit the next morning, and with the sports festival also the next day, things would be rather interesting for our green-haired protagonist. Ryuko woke up sore, sticky with sweat covering her body, and her inner beast was for once in her life at ease. The usual feeling of wanting to garner treasures of value, be them people, items, money or something she found to be valuable. She felt none of it, almost as if her dragon had been subdued for now and was resting, or was it content? She did not know the difference really, maybe it could be both. Hearing the strong beat in her ear was relaxing, but she wondered where the sound was coming from, or what was the source of such a beautiful tune. She lifted her head from the warm pillow to see a bare chest, a masculine chest, and it all clicked in her head. I was tamed, utterly defeated until I gave my body to him under the vow of being his for the rest of eternity. The dragoness thought. Her thoughts warmed her chest as she smiled in tired joy. He had done it. For the first and only time in her life she had been defeated in her title of a dragon and was tamed by an ultimate alpha. Izuku Midoriya the wolf to lay claim to her and turn her into his woman. She had no problem with it, as she could now be loved and love her destined mate. She now had pack members as her lovers and family. Laying her head back upon his chest she snuggled into his warmth, her reptilian cold blood warming up to his warm body and her nostrils filling with his scent. "You're looking pretty cozy there, Ryu-chan." Ryuko sighed but did not open her eyes. "Rumi, let me enjoy this please." The now recognized Rumi huffed, pushing the hair out of her face. She looked at her best friend with a smirk. "That was one hell of a fight you two got into. You hurting anywhere?" The dragoness let out a deep breath. "A little, it's almost like I can still feel where he bit down on my wing." Flap. Quote. 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 "Rumi, did you hear that?" Quote. "No." Flap. Ryuko pushed herself up and her neck swiveled around to look at her back, and like she feared there were two large draconic wings attached to her back, but that wasn't all, as there was also a tail connected to her tailbone as well. Quote. "Rumi, I'm going to kill you." Rumi raised an eyebrow and rested her head on her hands as she kicked her feet. "Why? I wasn't the one to evolve your quirk." Ryuko paused and stopped mid-lunge. "What do you? Oh, I remember now. Recovery Girl did say he could do that. I kind of forgot due to how horny I was at the time." Snorting, the rabbit heroine rolled over and grunted, her now heavily swollen belly even bigger than it was the day before. "Holy shit, you look like you're going to blow any day now," said Ryuko. Rumi glanced at her with a raised eyebrow. "Well, yeah, that's. Wait, were you very briefed on that?" "Briefed on what?" Ryuko asked in wonder. It was right then that Rumi realized Ryuko didn't know about the sped-up pregnancies, and she full-on belly laughed, causing Momo and Izuku to wake up. "Rumi, Why are you laughing, and should I be worried? Asked the gruff voice of Izuku, his hands trailing up Ryuko's body and settling on her wings, the fingers digging into the leathery scales and causing Ryuko a warm pleasurable feeling. She stifled a moan by biting her hand as his fingers touched a spot that made her legs shut tight. Her voice however finally escaped and a loud moan rang out. Ah, quote dot 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 dot. This was not how I saw this morning going, but then again I just barely woke up so I didn't have any expectations to begin with. Izuku said, continuing his menstruations on her wings. Momo took note of the last part and sweat dropped, and yet you continue to make her squirm under your touch. Izuku smirked. Well, of course, I still need to remind her she's my mate and I love her after all. Why you love me? Ryuko looked up at him with tears in her eyes. Izuku looked surprised until he realized what he said. He smiled softly at her and responded, yes, yes I did. I love you, I love Rumi and I love Momo. The three women blushed with Ryuko and Momo tearing up and hugging him. Rumi was worse as she cried openly and shoved his face between her breast. They stayed like that until the tears slowly but surely disappeared and left them in a comfort silence. That was until they heard snoring. Turning over they saw Nimari lazily splayed out on the bed snoring lightly, having not woken up at all and had missed the tender moment between them all. Momo snorted. Well, I guess that's our cue to wake her up and get ready for the day. The sports festival is in like 2 hours after all and I'd rather not miss it by sleeping in. Izuku groaned at this, but not because of having to get up but because Ryuko lifted herself up and off of his member, causing her to moan as white fluid poured from in between her legs. Quickly they all got up with waking Nimari, who was shocked to see Ryuko's wings and tail, along with the small horns jutting out of her skull, and with shooting her height from 5 feet 4 to 5 feet 10. Izuku had asked if she could shift back to her human form and after a few tries she was able to do just that. Her new features disappeared and her height went back to her normal size. That was a surprise but not more than when Izuku noticed her forked tongue while making out with her in the shower, and after some tests prompted by Izuku they found that her tongue was permanent, unlike the rest of her changes could be switched on and off. Izuku wasn't gonna lie though, the tongue was actually really attractive and sexy in his opinion and he stated it aloud without shame. That caused a few different reactions. Ryuko blushed and covered her face with her wings that sprouted out of shoulder blades. Rumi laughed loudly, Momo giggled and Nimari blushed and licked her lips as it gave her ideas. Not long after they exited the bathroom and got dressed, it was around 7:45 a.m. when they entered the common room to eat. They were greeted with the sight of the entire class along with Recovery Girl, Nezu and All Might. Curiously Izuku greeted them, "Yo, good morning you guys." A chorus of responses from his class and All Might, but Recovery Girl and Nezu were not one of them. Upon seeing this Izuku felt something tense in the back of his head and he walked over to the two. "I can tell something is wrong, so go ahead and say it," said Izuku bluntly, causing others to be surprised by his behavior. Nezu smiled and Recovery Girl glared at him sternly. The principal stepped up and addressed him. "Midoriya, there has been an incident yesterday during your fight against Yukio." Izuku's eyes shifted into slits with the color changing and an aura of protectiveness emanated from him. "What type of incident?" Nezu's smile widened. "A bystander that was near the entrance gate heard the commotion you and Yukio were causing while fighting. This bystander in turn caught sight of you two and took a video of you not only fighting her in your werewolf form but also defeating her without issue. Quote dot 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 dot. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that's bad, right?" asked Izuku with his aura gone and a new tense feeling in his gut. Nezu shrugged. "Depends on the viewer. I for instance think this is a great opportunity for you, but Recovery Girl doesn't think so." Izuku turned to the elderly woman who had her arms crossed. "Did I do something wrong?" Recovery Girl dropped her glare and sighed heavily. "No, this is on our part, mainly Nezu's I might add. But I'm more upset with the fact you've gotten 4 women pregnant in the past 2 days and one of them is going to give birth today or tomorrow with how large her belly has become." Rumi retorted back at this. "Hey, I'm not that big." The elderly woman didn't even acknowledge the rabbit heroine and turned to All Might. "I blame you for this." Toshinori Yagi aka All Might recoiled. What did I do?" "You know why. You literally spent a year with the boy before he got into UA and never did you think to tell him about protection." I don't think I'm qualified to talk to him about that. I am his mentor, but sex ed is a little out of my ballpark," replied Toshinori sheepishly. But just then a loud voice interrupted the two adults. "What the hell are you talking about? Shitty Deku couldn't have been taught by the #1 hero." The two adults turned to the infuriated blonde and one scoffed while the other paled. "Oh shoot, you weren't supposed to know that." "What the F?" Bakugo was cut off by Kyoka throwing a dog treat at him. "Shut up and eat your breakfast. We don't have time for yelling. The sports festival is in like 40 minutes and I'm freaking the fuck out," yelled the purple-haired tomboy. Bakugo growled before throwing the dog treat to the side and finished eating the rest of his breakfast, but continued sending a glare Izuku's way. Speaking of the green-haired wolf, he gave Kyoka a grateful smile and thanked her. "Thanks Rockstar, I owe you one." The punk girl blushed at the nickname Izuku gave her on the spot but nodded. "I'll keep you to it." The rest of the morning went by quickly as Nezu spoke to Izuku about the possible repercussions of the video and how his relationship with Momo, Nimori, Rumi and Ryuko may get out. Izuku honestly spoke that he didn't care about it getting out, and that he wouldn't shy away from showing his love for his mates due to some assholes wanting to get a story out of him. A few coos and ahs from his female classmates happened after he said this, and some of his male classmates nodded to him with respect at his response. Rumi purred and leaned into his side with Ryuko doing the same on his other side. The two women rested their heads on his arms causing him to smile. Nezu smiled at the response and interaction between Izuku and his pack. He then clapped his hands getting their attention. "Then that's all I have for you. I will enjoy seeing you fight in the festival, so do your best everyone." But right as Nezu got off his chair and started walking with Recovery Girl and All Might, Izuku asked something. "Wait sir, before you go, should I use my super strength quirk in the festival or should I stick with just my werewolf quirk instead?" "That depends. Did you use it during your fight with Yukio?" asked the rat god with an evil smile etching itself onto his face. Izuku shook his head. "No, that was just the werewolf quirk." "Why do you ask?" Instantly the room erupted into an uproar, mainly Rumi yelling about how strong her pack leader was and Bakugo complaining about bullshit quirks. But eventually the room was calmed down by Nezu's hysterical laughter that creeped out everyone besides Recovery Girl. In the meantime Izuku was wondering what was wrong with what he said. It was only until Nana spoke up in his mind that he understood. "You really have turned into a himbo, huh? Oh well, it just makes you hotter in my opinion. To answer why they're so hysterical, it's because you took down the #10 hero while holding back and could probably give Toshi a run for his money at the rate you're growing." "Oh, that makes sense, but what's a himbo?" Izuku asked innocently. Nana cackled before redirecting him. "That's a question for later. I'd pay more attention to the principal if I were you." Izuku snapped out of his mental conversation to see Nezu smiling while looking at him. "You are a true Marvel Midoriya, and to answer your question. Yes, use your werewolf quirk and your super strength. I want to see you hunt down your prey during the festival and proclaim yourself a true alpha." Nezu chastised Recovery Girl, also known as Chio. Nezu turned to her. "I want him to surpass his limits. And besides, he has regeneration now, so if he breaks his arms or more it'll heal, so what's the harm done?" Recovery Girl glared at him heatedly. "You know what? Fine, do whatever, but don't come to me when the sponsors and the board are upset to see a student cause himself serious harm on live TV." The white-haired chimera rolled his eyes. "Fuck the sponsors, they can kiss my hairy ass if they wanna fuck with me." The principal laughed like a crazy person as he walked out of the dorm, leaving everyone in different states of shock and/or surprise. Rumi leaned into Izuku's side. Did she just say you can regenerate?" Izuku turned to her and nodded. "Yup, but I'm not sure how good it is. To me it seems like it's getting better and better the more damage I take. From my fight with you a couple days ago to my fight with Ryuko yesterday, it's noticeably about twice as fast than it was before." The brown bunny blinked a few times in amazement before smirking and rubbing her head against him in a primal manner of claiming him again. Izuku reciprocated this and kissed her on the nose, getting an "oh" from Mina, who was watching him like a hawk. Time skip. Breakfast passed easy enough and eventually everyone left to the stadium holding the sports festival. Izuku said goodbye to the girls as they met up with Izuku's and Momo's mothers. He and the other students were dressed in the navy blue school's PE uniform. It was a zip-up jacket and some blue track pants. The atmosphere of the room was tense as they were about to be on live TV in front of a huge audience. Kyoka seemed to be having the worst reaction to this as she was visibly panicking like crazy. Izuku, being the kind himbo he was, went over to her, hoping to comfort her, but while doing so he remembered what Momo had told him just a few minutes ago. Flashback. The others had gone into the waiting room but Izuku stayed outside with Momo as she said she wanted to talk with him about something. They were alone as no one beside them was allowed in that hallway. So, what did you wanna talk about, Mo-chan? Momo blushed as she collected herself. Her clenched hand covered her mouth as she cleared her throat and spoke to the tall young man in front of her. I wanted to let you know that I and the others are alright with you pursuing more women. It's inevitable at this point and we are alright with that. Quote. Excuse me. Izuku responded with a blush sprouting across his face at the outlandish situation he found himself in. Momo sighed and explained, Izuku, you're a hunk of a man that most women would gladly get in a relationship with if given the chance. I can already count a handful of women who are already interested in you or were already before your change, so with that said I think you should pursue Kyoka next. Izuku's jaw dropped. But. No buts. She's liked you for a long while just like me, so you're basically 2 feet in the door already. The teen wolf tilted his head at that. Isn't the saying 1 foot in the door? If I was 2 feet in the door then I'm already inside. Momo smirked sensually. Exactly. If you pushed her against a wall and made your way with her she'd probably make you put a ring on her finger while you were at it. Quote. I don't know how to feel about what you just said. It sounds like you want me to be forceful with her. That's exactly what I'm trying to get at. So go in there and fuck her. Well, not really because you have the festival, but you get what I'm saying, and if any other girls catch your eye, flirt a little and see where it goes. Izuku blinked, and blinked some more as his mind registered everything his first girlfriend had said and just gave up and nodded. Okay, sure, I'll do that. Smiling brightly, Momo leaned onto her tippy toes and grabbed onto him to kiss him on the lips before turning around and walking away. I'm sure you'll love her, and make sure to grope her thighs, she said she finds that hot. What the fuck did I just agree to? Flashback end. His cheeks burned with a blush as Izuku recalled what had been said, but he shook those thoughts away and patted Kyoka's head. Relax, Rockstar, everything is gonna be just fine. Don't worry about the people in the audience, just focus on why you're here. And that's to kick some ass. Kyoka's blush darkened as she spoke just below a whisper, but due to his enhanced hearing Izuku was able to pick it up. It's not about that. I heard you. Izuku tilted his head curiously. Heard what? Tapping her jacks together, which Izuku found very cute, Kyoka answered. I heard what you and Momo said outside the waiting room. I didn't mean to overhear, but it just sorta happened. Oh, I see. He in fact did not see as his blush covered his entire face and reached the tip of his ears, causing him to feel hot in the face. Rubbing the back of his neck, he asked something that was rather bold of him. And are you against the idea Momo spoke about? About being together with me and the others? Kyoka froze and her jacks, acting on a mind of their own, drifted towards his hand that was still placed atop her head. They wrapped around his wrist and Izuku leaned forward to see her face as she looked up at him. I'd like that, she said with tears misting her eyes. Izuku, smelling that honey-sweet scent in the air, and felt his instincts take over as he leaned further and captured her lips in a kiss. Kyoka was surprised at first but quickly returned the kiss while her jacks changed targets to wrap around Izuku's neck and squeezing every couple seconds in rhythm with her heartbeat. That was until Ochako shouted, causing the two to freeze and realize they weren't alone, with most of their classmates most likely staring at them. What the fuck? The teen wolf and punk tomboy leapt away from each other while snapping their heads in Ochako Uraraka's direction, only to see that the brunette was absolutely pissed. I gonna call dibs months ago, yet y'all keep throwing yourselves at him like it's a darn game of baseball. Spoke Ochako, accidentally letting her accent slip. Izuku, who had never heard her accent, blushed a little and thought to himself, she sounds really cute when she's mad. The punk girl thought differently however and glared at the brunette. You know the rules, Ochako. You get 1 month to confess or it's free game, so says the girl code. And besides, if you would have just been honest with yourself and confessed already, you would have been the first to be in his bed with him. Ochako tightened her hands into fist. Fine, that may be true, but don't you just go kissin' him in public. It's Mac and me, ya know. Her attitude turned sheepish at the end, making Kaminari take a guess at what she meant and unfortunately hit it dead on: jealous. The gravity girl turned and deadpanned at him, a little but mostly something else that I and the rest of the girls will talk about later. The blonde Pikachu was confused but let it be and continued to watch the drama unfold with the rest of the guys. Izuku for his part was completely caught off guard by the reveal of Ochako having feelings for him. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. All of the physical contact they shared, how she'd always asked to hang out with him, even those times she dropped her pen in front of him when only wearing a skirt with no panties underneath, were now making a lot more sense. Yet before he or anyone could say anything else on the matter, Iida entered the room and spoke aloud. "All right everyone, it's time to walk to the field. Keep yourselves in an orderly fashion as not to dishonor our predecessors and be a role model for the next gener." He was cut off mid-speech by Bakugo shouting at him, "We got it, Hot Wheels. So shut up and let's go already." Iida pouted at being interrupted but understood and walked through the door. "Then follow me everyone." And they did, although while Izuku was walking he was immediately sandwiched between Ochako and Kyoka, the two giving each other the stink eye, but when he looked at them they would return his gaze with a warm smile like nothing was going on, which unsettled him greatly. The hell has my life become at this point? Was all Izuku could think while Present Mike called out his class, causing the crowd to go wild. And as he was nearly exiting the tunnel to walk out into the light of the sun, Nana responded to his question. "Probably a eki manga or straight up rated 18+ doujin. All you're missing is tentacles for that last one, which will appear sooner rather than later at this rate." Sweat dropping, Izuku replied back, "Thank you as always for your creativity criticism, Nana, and what the hell does that last part mean?" He could feel her smiling back at him. "It's no problem, and don't worry about it, instead worry about how you're gonna go and kick some ass." With that said, Izuku felt Nana's connection fade, letting him think alone, which was unfortunate because he was now alone with his thoughts, which were immediately making him start to have a panic attack. In the VIP stands, Momo sat with her mother inside the VIP box of the stadium. They wasn't alone, as Inko, Midoriya and the rest of the UA staff were sitting in the one-sided glass booth for privacy reasons. And of course Ryuko and Rumi were sitting there too, but while Rumi was trying to eat popcorn and watch through the one-sided glass, Recovery Girl was giving her an ultrasound, with Inko filming the entire thing like the wonderful mother and future grandmother she is. The children looked healthy, which was a plus, but it also seemed that the pregnancy was going faster than expected. Recovery Girl said as much, to expect them later tonight or early in the morning. As mind-blowing as that sounded, Rumi didn't think much of it and simply said, "Cool, means I can get back in shape quicker and get to brutalizing villains again. I can almost hear the breaking of bones and it gets my blood pumping." After hearing this, the elderly heroine gave Rumi a good whack on the head with a scolding before moving to Ryuko. The dragoness was a lot more invested as this was her first ultrasound, unlike Rumi who was having her second one. Inko, the #1 mom in the entire multiverse, recorded Ryuko's ultrasound to send to Izuku since he couldn't be there, but what Chio found was rather intriguing to say the least. Instead of a normal womb with an umbilical cord connected to the baby, inside Ryuko was an egg that was the size of an apple already and was slowly but surely growing in size. She would need further testing, but it seemed to Recovery Girl that Ryuko would eventually transform into her dragon form to finish off the pregnancy and would lay the egg at its max size with her child inside of it. Honestly, most in the room were fascinated to hear this and asked some questions that Chio didn't have the answers to at the moment, but she promised to answer them later when she did. It was then, however, that Class 1A was called out by Present Mike. They all turned to see them, and Izuku was easily the most noticeable due to his outrageous height difference between him and his other classmates. Add the two girls wrapped around his arms and he was a sight to behold. "Anyone wanna bet on Midoriya officially getting with a new girl by the end of the festival?" asked Nimari, who was petting her pet cat Sushi. Momo scoffed at hearing the purple-haired woman's words. "That's a sucker's bet and you know it. I bet 1,000 yen he gets one by the time the tournament portion starts." Rumi smiled wickedly. "Ha! I bet he'll get a girl pregnant during lunch." "You're on," said Nimari and Momo in unison. While this ridiculous conversation was happening, the others looked at them in disbelief and shock. Inko, however, cried out with happy tears, "So many grandbabies." Toshinori, who was in Small Might form, awkwardly patted her back. "It's all right, Mrs. Midoriya, let it all out." Back with Izuku. The teen wolf somehow had Kyoka and Ochako attached to him by the hip with their hands interlocked with his own. He could already feel the sparks shooting between the two, but he was more focused on how everyone was looking straight at him. I'm not that tall, right? He thought to himself in a panic. However, it was then that Present Mike shouted into his microphone, getting the attention of everyone in the stadium, and alongside them as their sibling class, 1B. Izuku turned to see none of them as tall or taller than him, but he kept up hope until Present Mike let the other courses out in quick succession with not a single person rivaling him in stature. Oh my god, I really am the tallest one here, and everyone is looking straight at me. Panicked the teen wolf. He may be strong and rival pros, but that didn't mean he was used to a stadium full of people staring right at him. Unbeknownst to Izuku, his height was only one of the reasons he was looked at so much, the other reasons being his facial hair, incredibly muscular build, and finally the fact two girls were clinging to him with their bodies pushed up against him and visibly fighting over him. Some of the crowd thought Izuku was a playboy, which technically was true in a sense. The only thing separating him from a real playboy was the fact he wasn't actually trying, and that it was usually women who sought him out instead of the other way around. But before their stray thoughts of Izuku could linger any longer, Mike shouted into his mic, "Alright everybody. Hosting today alongside me is my friend, my homie, my hobo best friendo, Eraserhead. And the person on the field helping host this lovely event is none other than the Queen of Laughs herself, Miss Joke." The crowd clapped and cheered for them, and when the clapping died down, Mike spoke once more. "Now, we were originally gonna have Midnight to be on the field, but she's out on maternity leave at the moment, but don't worry, Miss Joke is just as sassy and upbeat as her." Izuku and a few others facepalmed. Izuku may have said he didn't care if their relationship got out, but going and telling the public about Nimari being pregnant wasn't exactly what he expected. Soon the sound of flesh being smacked was heard through the intercom system as Aizawa growled out, "Mike, you idiot, we weren't supposed to mention that." "Ow, ouch, not the sunglasses, I got them from Gucci," cried out Present Mike. After an awkward minute they were muted and Miss Joke took control of the situation. "Wow, did not expect that announcement. Oh well, guess it's my turn to talk now. Hello everyone, I am Miss Joke, and today I'll be the woman of the hour to explain rules and speak when I'm needed." Her smile was blinding as she turned and addressed the calmed crowd, who were previously shouting in surprise at the news of the R-rated heroine becoming a mother. A lot of fanboys and girls were audibly saddened and heartbroken, but soon figured out that Midnight becoming a MILF was actually kinda hot and let it go. "Now, first up we need the..." She was interrupted, confusing the crowd and students, but she didn't address them as she touched her earpiece and listened, her smile becoming bigger and bigger as the person on the other end finished speaking to her. Miss Joke grinning impossibly wide before she spoke up. "Change of plans everyone. Usually we would have the first year representative come up and make a speech, but Nezu decided on something new this year." Izuku felt a pit form in his stomach as the absolute dread filled his body at the little bit he accidentally heard from Miss Joke's earpiece by using his super hearing. "Nezu, you white furry bastard, I'm making you into a pelt when this is over." Rage at what he was going to be forced into doing made his inner wolf angry enough to curse. Kyoka, who didn't make out what was said between the rat and Miss Joke, looked up at him with slight amusement and mostly pity. "He's gonna have you do the speech, isn't he?" Sighing and letting his anger go for the moment, Izuku let Miss Joke announce his fate. "Instead, we're going to have All Might's successor and Nezu's favorite student, Izuku Midoriya, take the stage and speak for the first years." Single quote ... "Nezu, what the fucking fuck are you thinking?" shouted Izuku in his head at what Nezu made Miss Joke say to the now stunned silent crowd. They weren't alone in silence as Izuku's entire class turned and looked at him with their mouths hung open. Similarly, Kyoka and Ochako did the same. In the VIP box, Toshinori's jaw was hanging open before he stood up and buffed up snapped his head in the principal's direction. "Nezu, what the fuck are you thinking by exposing my and Midoriya's connection?" Inko recoiled back at seeing the man who comforted her a second ago turn out to be All Might in disguise. However, that surprise shifted to intrigue as she asked, "Wait, what do you mean by connection? Is my baby boy actually your successor, or whatever that would mean?" Toshinori paled and turned to not only Inko but the rest of the room, who either A. knew who he was and about his condition, or B. weren't in the know and now knew about his small might form from his outburst. I may or may not have trained young Midoriya for a year before he came to UA. The number one said sheepishly while rubbing the back of his neck with his left hand and not making eye contact. Recovery Girl shook her head in exasperation before turning to Nezu, who was smiling like a loon. Nezu, tell me what in the actual fuck you were thinking before I make you into a new winter coat or let young Midoriya do it for me. Nezu continued to smile even after receiving that threat. I have many reasons, one being the fact eventually Izuku will show his werewolf forms and the public will realize he is the very same person who took down Yukio, and once that happens people will want to know much more about Midoriya. To the point eventually they will figure out his mentor was All Might from all of the security footage of the two being together at Takoba Beach before he enrolled into UA. The blonde muscle head paled at this, but they will figure out about my form if they do that. The principal chuckled to himself. Don't take me for an amateur Yagi, of course they won't. I scrubbed the cameras of your frail form except for when you're in muscle form. So no need to worry. But this just brought more questions, Nimari being the one to ask the main one on their minds. But, why go through all of this then, and why keep All Might and Izuku's interactions on public cameras? Nezu sipped his tea for a second. Simple, soon All Might will retire. That's a fact we can't change, and by doing this early introduction of Midoriya to the public they will ingrain him into their minds. They will think, oh, with Midoriya becoming a hero soon we don't have to worry because we have someone like him around just in case. And with this we can manipulate the villains in hiding as well. Quote. Okay, I see your reasoning, but why now of all times to introduce Izuku to the world? Asked Momo. Smiling wider, Nezu replied, because why the hell not? It's way more fun this way instead of a conference or something just as boring, and Midoriya will show how strong he is and will continue to grow, instilling fear into those who will try and take advantage of the situation. Everyone in the VIP box sweat dropped at this before turning back to Izuku, who had already walked to the stage and was next to Miss Joke with a microphone in his hand. With Izuku, the green-haired young man gulped at all the eyes on him, all of which were looking at him expectingly. Hello, I'm Izuku Midoriya, but I guess you already know that. He stated awkwardly while the crowd stayed completely silent, along him panic even more on the inside. Nana decided to chime in and help him out a little, gave some helping words. Izuku, relax and take a deep breath. The best advice I can give you is to speak from your heart and be true to yourself, kid. Taking the dead woman's advice, the tall teen closed his eyes to concentrate and took a deep breath before exhaled just as deeply, and when he opened his eyes there was a spark shining in them. His demeanor changed as he spoke without hesitation. I stand before you today as a hero student to the best hero academy in Japan, but that wasn't always the case. I was once just a quirkless kid dreaming of being a hero like any other kid out there. Many murmurs rang out through the crowd at hearing this, but Izuku wasn't done. Not in the slightest. About a year ago my idol and mentor found me. He saw a quirkless kid who had the heart and drive of a hero but was shackled down by today's standards. But that didn't mean he gave up on me. Instead he trained me for a year, developing my skinny body into a usable tool to achieve my goals. The crowd became silent once again at hearing All Might's decision to train someone who was quirkless and give them the chance to become a hero, and that the tall muscular young man before them was that same boy. But that's not all to the story. Once going to the entrance exam, I finishing the written exam, and I with the rest of the examines participated in the physical portion. During this I used my quirk I didn't even know about for the first time purely by accident. At that Izuku could see even his own classmates in surprise. The bob-cut brunette he was friends with being the most surprised as she realized something which made her jaw drop and her eyes to widen. Izuku continued before the crowd could get out of hand at what he was saying. That day I saved a classmate of mine, but in doing so I broke both of my legs and arm from using my quirk on instinct. I had no idea how I had done it or why my quirk appeared all these years later after being told I didn't have one. Yet from speaking with Recovery Girl and Nezu I was able to make a theory on what happened. Everyone was hooked on his every word as they were leaning forward in their seats at the story Izuku was unveiling to them. His classmates and the people in the VIP box was the same. Breathing in deeply once again, Izuku explained, "We believe that my quirk was so powerful that it needed a strong body for me to handle it, and even then I was still feeling the aftermath due to how much power it had accumulated over the years of being unused. Recovery Girl even stated that if I had awakened it when I was 4 years old like any other kid I would have blown up in a bloody paste while taking out a full mile of land from the explosion, so in a way my body locking my quirk away in a frozen state was a good thing. Pale faces filled the crowd at hearing that last remark. To think a quirk could do something like that at a young age was mind-boggling but also intriguing as to the science behind it all. However, my quirk staying locked did something else that we have found out just recently. Due to the accumulated energy, my quirk genes have been oversaturated or overcharged in a way that shouldn't be possible. In short, my quirk genes are unstable, and instead of dying just 3 days ago I unlocked a new secondary quirk that's nothing like the original one. Mouths hung open at that, and one man even shouted how outrageous it was and that it had to be fake, but Izuku just shook his head. No, it's very much real. After all, one is super strength, that is a pool of energy that grows over time and shoots a type of bioelectricity from my body upon activation, while the second one is a literal mutation quirk. So neither are even close in terms of how they work or type of quirks we as a society have put into categories like emitter or physical mutation. At that no one could say a thing, and the man who had previously stood and shouted was now slouched in his seat in bewilderment at what he had heard. That didn't mean there weren't those who weren't convinced. In fact, a bit of the crowd were stating how ridiculous it all was. Izuku shook his head at their remarks, but he continued with his speech, not letting them bother him. Now, I'm not going to give my life story, but I will say this. I've had a quirk for about a month now and just recently received a second one. In that time I've worked hard and have gone through obstacles to keep my place in Class 1A. From the first day here I had to prove my homeroom teacher I belonged. Shortly after we had our first combat class where I needed to go against one of our strongest students one-on-one and can't put damage but victorious. The crowd listened intently as Izuku spoke, some becoming inspired while some others became suspicious, but that didn't stop Izuku in the slightest. Each time I overcame my disadvantages and secured victory, and no matter what comes my way I won't buckle, I won't yield. I promised my mentor I would become a symbol like him, but one greater than a symbol of peace. I will be a symbol of hope and resilience that won't succumb to anyone or anything while giving those in need hope of a better day. His eyes burned with passion and the crowd was feeling inspired from his words. So to everyone here today and the years following who look back upon this day, remember this. The sparks of one for all covered Izuku as his voice echoed and reverberated through the stadium and beyond. No matter what, I want everyone here, at home and even in other countries, to hear my words. I want you to struggle but not lose hope and move past those struggles to achieve whatever it is you want to achieve, because nothing in this world worth fighting for is easy. So be your own hero, be your own idol who pushes you past your limits. Be the hero I believe you all can be, that you yourselves needs. Izuku's eyes were a piercing blue that could dig holes through those he made eye contact with, and his final words would be remembered for all those to come after him. Anyone can be a hero. All you have to do is reach out to someone out there and help. It's not a piece of plastic with word on it that makes you a hero, it's your actions. The smallest of things can make anyone a hero. Maybe it's helping at a homeless shelter, maybe by giving someone who needs it, or even something as simple as making a person smile. That's what makes a hero. That is the definition of a hero, not a license or a strong quirk. And with that said, I want everyone competing here today to do their best, to show the world the hero inside all of us that's just waiting to come out and shine brightly for all those around to see. Izuku handed the mic to a stupefied Miss Joke, who grabbed it and after a few seconds blinked and came to her senses, but by then Izuku was already gone and with his class. Well, I don't know about you all, but that was one hell of a speech, and I believe it's time to select the first event. In the Public Safety Commission. The screen showing the UA Sports Festival glowed dimly in the dark meeting room as the occupants inside were silent, not for lack of words but the fact they didn't know what to address first. Whether it be that the #1 hero of Japan having been training a successor in secret all this time, or the fact that said student was just now barely in his first year but with the trained body of a pro. It was too complicated of a situation to just assume things or act without thinking. This was a very delicate situation and they all knew it. One so delicate that it may influence Japan, nay the very world for centuries to come if it truly reached that point. So with that in mind, why did the female president of the HPSC feel at ease for some reason? Maybe it was the young man's words that caused her to feel this way, but that didn't matter. No, She was in charge and needed to set boundaries before the more ambitious of the executives took this as an opportunity. So with her goals in mind, the short purple-haired woman cleared her throat, causing the others in the room to turn to her. I believe we all understand that this is a complex affair that we cannot make a mistake in. Am I correct in thinking so? Murmurs of agreement met her words, and taking this as her chance, she explained her orders. We need to survey this entirely before making any moves, and that goes for everyone here. Don't act without my supervision or go ahead. I will not allow any of you to step on the tail of a lion when it can easily enough tear out our throats. Everyone understood where she was coming from and agreed. Even the ones who would usually plot behind the scenes knew better than to piss off Madam President when it was something of such importance. And with that decision they all looked back to the screen, waiting to see the strength of their up-and-coming symbol. Meanwhile, inside a skyscraper in Deku City, a man tapped his chin while looking at the screen showing the UA Sports Festival. He was in deep thought of the news that he and the rest of his associates had just learned. The meeting room was in an uproar of voices at the revelation of All Might having a successor, a new mountain they would have to climb for the Metal Liberation Army to finally rise and overthrow the government that had restricted their gifts for so long. But unknowingly, just like the president of the HPSC, the leader of the Metal Liberation Army and the grandson of the first Destro found a strange sense of hope filling his being. Maybe this boy could be the key to their freedom of ideals towards quirks. The boy seemed to be more of a keen observer than All Might ever was, and due to the fact he had grown up quirkless, he was undoubtedly more jaded on his views towards society. So maybe with a few nudges or even a talk in person they could become allies instead of enemies. They might even find common ground in some ways. Rikiya Yatsubashi aka Destro was brought out of his thoughts by his subordinate. Turning to his right he saw the blue-skinned woman, her moniker being Curious. Supreme Leader, what is your take on this? Asked the blue-skinned and pink-haired woman. Destro took a big breath as he leaned forward with his fingers intertwined. The others in the room, upon hearing the honorific to their leader, turned and awaited his will. As we all know, All Might has been a figure that has been seen as a tool the government could throw at us if we were to rise. I suspect you all think this young man will become the same. He sat his people nod, which made sense, but he didn't stop in explanation his idea. However, I also see this new development presented to us as an opportunity. His followers soaked in his last words and became intrigued by what their leader would suppose they do with this rising hero. Destro didn't wait long to bring up his thoughts after seeing his followers were eager for his remarks. This boy has seen the worst of our current society, the unfairness of it all. But most importantly, he has seen the worst of the hero system. I believe he may become a new component to our silent war against this unjust society, whether he knows it or not. Curious leaned onto her palm with a raised eyebrow. You mean to bring All Might's successor to our side? Do you truly believe that can be done, Supreme Leader? Her red-haired leader nodded in her direction. That has yet to be seen, and that is also why I want you and Trumpet to dig up as much information on him as possible. I want to know everything about the boy. Leaning back into his chair in a contemplative manner, he spoke in a way that said there was no room for error. I want to know his ideals, what made him believe in such ideals, and what molded him to become worthy in All Might's eyes to lead the country into a new era. The entire room was silent for a moment, each and every one of them contemplating his words. Some of the more radical wondered how the weak quirkless mindset could have affected the boy, while the others were simply pondering on how someone from the very bottom who was now on the top would lead the world. But the thought they all had in common was who Izuku Midoriya was as a person, and especially what he would be like as a hero in the near future. The hidden lair of the LOV. The leader of the League of Villains sat on a stool inside her base, the bar being dead silent due to how empty it was, but even then it was eerily silent until the gray-haired woman growled. The once cold glass of bourbon with a cube of ice decayed in her touch, the liquid and ice spilling over the bar counter like the flood of rage that currently brewed inside the female who had caused it. Damn it, damn it, damn it, she roared, at first speaking in a whisper that by the end was a scream of fury. Her crimson eyes dug daggers into the screen that showed the boy from the USJ. She had called it back then, but unfortunately brushed it off. Yet now her memory of that event played without pause, mocking her, the way she had asked if he was the pupil of All Might with his strength and name of his technique. But she had brushed it off as nothing, thinking the boy was too fragile back then, breaking his bones just to attack, but now it irked her. stinging deeply, making her feel like an utter fool for doing so. Her white teeth clenched, glimmering under the lights inside the bar, her face contorted into a snarl as her anger had moved solely from All Might to the young man on screen. Just like her master had been with her, it seemed All Might had done the same with this teen, and in doing so he was now destined to be her rival in this game of heroes and villains. She was obviously Player 1 fighting against the now revealed Player 2, and the thought of it just made her more angry. Kurogiri, what did that green-haired whore say this bastard's name was again? The purple wispy butler responded as he didn't look up from cleaning his bar glass, not minding in the slightest of his mistress's new mess. Izuku Midoriya, I believe. Izuku Midoriya, I'll make sure to break him, a fast death will not do. When I get my hands on him he'll suffer my wrath, spoke Mori Shigaraki in a maniacal voice. Her master couldn't help but grin. The number one villain, all for one, placed a palm on her cheek as she smiled menacingly at how her disciple had progressed towards her goal of being the villain she knew she could be. Her melodically toned speaking from the TV monitor, in due time young Mori, you will make him your plaything when we are done with him, he will beg you for mercy and you will give him none. A glint formed in Mori's red orbs as she liked the sound of that idea, but even more so was the dark whisper in the back of her head about all the agony she could cause him, whether it be from torture or in sick pleasure to help her feminine urges. One thing was for certain, Izuku Midoriya was hers, to fight, to torture, to play with, and defeat. And she'd be damned if anyone tried to get between her and her prize. With Izuku, the tall teen stretched his arms and leg muscles as he stood in the very back of the crowd that had formed. They gathered just outside the tunnel leading the way towards the start of the obstacle course. He had waved to his class earlier and told them that he was rooting for them, however as most of them left, only one stayed by his side. His eyes wandered to the petite goth girl known as Kyoka Jiro, her eyes looking at him with a glint that made his instincts hum, but even more so was the smell that wafted off of her. It took him an embarrassing amount of time to figure it out, but he now understood that he was smelling the lustful scent her body was unconsciously giving off. And the more he focused on her scent, the clearer it was that Kyoka was literally leaking sexual fluids just by looking at him and being in his close proximity. He honestly felt ashamed of how much pride he took from making her want him so much, yet he also understood by now that it was inevitable that he'd bed the goth woman in front of him. Although his mind lingered on the images of him taking the much smaller woman compared to the rest he had bred, he still managed to hear her call his name. Blinking his eyes to get the picture of Kyoka pushed against a wall as he thrust it into her out of his mind, Izuku replied, yes Rockstar. The earphone jack girl twirled her left jack around her pointer finger as she spoke with a blush, your thing is getting hard, and I also wanted to ask you something. One quick look to his pants showed the outline of his growing member fighting against the layers of clothing. He hurriedly adjusted himself before thanking the perplet. Thanks for the heads up Rockstar, and you mentioned a question. He blushed from the previous display but also gazed at her in curiosity. Kyoka nodded after gulping, the image of Izuku's half-formed tent infecting her brain. She almost feared that he might break her when they would eventually have sex, and yet the thought alone made her even more tempted to go through with it. Clearing her throat, Kyoka asked her question that she had been pondering. I know you asked the principal earlier, but seriously, are you gonna go wolf or use your full, whatever it's called that makes the spark up? It's called full cowling, and that's still a good question, said Izuku, now wondering back to the same thing he wondered about earlier. He held his chin in his hand as he thought about it. How much more of OFA could he use now without pushing his limits? And how much fun would it be to do the third option he had considered earlier? With a smirk, Izuku decided to do the unknown third option. He smirked and turned back to Kyoka. Neither, it sounds more fun to do this quirkless. Quote. What? Exclaimed Kyoka as her eyes went wide, her lust pushed to the side for the moment as her shock overpowered her. Izuku simply laughed. Oh come on, it'll be fun, and if I or someone else is in a bind I'll use full cowling. Yes, but, ya know what, never mind, that sounds like something you'd do. Good luck Izu, I'll see you at the finish line. Kyoka waved and walked a bit further into the pack of students, leaving Izuku to smirk as he thought of how fun this was going to be. After all, even if he was going to show the world that he was here, that didn't mean he couldn't have fun with it. The four lights blinked above the tunnel, the red light blaring in light as Miss Joke spoke to the crowd and students. "All right folks, everyone seems to be ready, so on the count of 3, we'll get the first event started." Izuku got into a running stance. He already had a plan to tackle the first true obstacle, and of course how his classmates would start off making their own obstacles. His eyes looked for Todoroki but didn't see him, yet he still knew how the bicolored team would start the race. 1. The red light blinked with the number 1 inside of it. 2. The second light lit up yellow and the red turned the same color, making the students look at it with trepidation, knowing the start of the race was about to start. Miss Joke smiled sickly as she shouted into her microphone. 3. Everyone tensed, some leaning forward to kick off in a running position while some cramped against one another trying to get started first. Go, shinked. Just as Izuku predicted, ice formed on the ground, catching most off guard as their feet were covered in a layer of ice, but those of Class 1A weren't captured. They too figured that the half-ice half-fire user would do something like this for the advantage it gave him. They each escaped the ice in their own way, from Sue jumping and hopping on the walls of the tunnel before the ice reached her, to Izuku who, well, it was sort of funny how he dodged it. Sorry, sorry, oof, super sorry. Ah shit. He jumped from student to student, using their shoulders as platforms to get ahead of the pack and used some pipes at the roof of the tunnel to swing himself forward. That was until he made it outside the tunnel and landed with his class just a little ways behind Todoroki, the path of ice making Izuku roll his eyes. Great, who does he think we are? Frozone for the Incredibles movies. Trying his best, Izuku sort of skated on the ice. It was more like slipping with style, but he couldn't exactly do anything else but use his hands to dig into the ice and yank himself forward into a slide on the surface of the ice. It was tedious but worked well enough, and even when the robots from the entrance exams that showed up whacking the shit out of Mineta didn't pose much of a challenge. A few punches, kicks and an uppercut destroyed the robots in his path and he quickly ran on the dirt, the ice path having ended by now. Although the 0-pointers were a bit much in Izuku's opinion, he didn't mind them that much. That was until Todoroki froze one in a way where it would fall on some students. Seems Izuku wouldn't keep this quirkless idea after all, so he turned to look back at the robot and shouted out in annoyance. "Oh come on you Elsa, knock off, that isn't cool, you could hurt those guys." Unknowingly making a pun aside and causing Miss Joke to laugh along with the crowd, Todoroki didn't respond, leaving to Izuku charged up full cowling. To his surprise, he jumped way past his old limit of 10%, and went all the way up to 65%. Well damn, who knew becoming a werewolf would have such a benefits? Disappearing from where he once stood, Izuku appeared next to the 0-pointer, the green electricity sparking with mixes of black in them, and punched the shit out of it, with a roar of Detroit smash. In a deafening boom, the giant robot was flung to the side safely in a place where it couldn't hurt anybody. The trees and dirt were destroyed or kicked up under the weight of the scraps left by the chunks of 0-pointer. Izuku landed on the ground making a spider crack where his feet met ground, and having already decided to say, fuck it, leapt up and passed everyone. Even passing by Todoroki, who had just reached the obstacle dubbed the fall by Miss Joke. His feet cratered the stone pillar in the center of the fall before disappearing once again as he did his second leap and hopped right over the last obstacle that Miss Joke didn't even mention due to Izuku completely bypassing it. Skidding right into the tunnel leading towards the finish line, he barely cleared the top of the tunnel, his hair brushing against it from almost overshooting the jump. He was grateful for that, since it would have been really embarrassing to smack face first into the concrete overhead on live television. Lucky for him, he made it by an inch. Speaking of making it, Izuku ran into the center of the stadium, fully clearing the obstacle course after saying fuck it to a live audience, which the cameras caught and broadcasted to everyone. Smiling widely, showing off his sharp canniness, the entire crowd that had been deadly quiet flipped 180, cheering loudly to the point some started stomping their feet and making the stadium shake. Our winner, taking first place in the obstacle course, is Izuku Midoriya, cheered Miss Joke, who was just as excited as the crowd. Huh, that was a lot easier than I thought it'd be, mused Izuku in his thoughts, not realizing how overpowered he was at this point, but he would soon. VIP booth, Inko cried out in joy, her waterfall tears soaking the dark red carpet of the room. My baby. Momo, Ryuko, Rumi and Nomori just fawned and boasted over their love, alpha, mate, husband. The most vocal of the four had to be Ryuko. Not because she was cheering like Rumi, but the fact she was emanating a low growl of approval towards the one who claimed her. A growl so powerful from her draconic vocal cords that shook the bulletproof glass. The others however didn't react to this, instead focused on Izuku and the rest of the race as the students were over halfway with the course by the time Izuku was finished. Toshinori leaned into his chair with a proud smile, for the time being letting Recovery Girl care for Izuku's mother and set up an IV for the woman. My boy, you truly have become strong. I do however wonder just what percent of one for all you used, because that seemed to be my 80% in my prime. Thought the blonde while watching his successor speak to the laughing heroine in the center of the stadium. Small time skip. Izuku relished in the autograph he had received from Miss Joke while waiting on the rest of the students to finish up the obstacle course, but he was jolted out of his hero obsession by a tap on his side. Turning around, Izuku had to look downward to see who had tapped him. It was a short in stature blonde girl with horns that he remembered coming out with Class 1B. Hello there. Did you need something?" asked Izuku kindly, trying not to intimidate the poor blue-eyed girl. While shaking from what Izuku guessed was nerves, the blonde nodded. "I good meet you, mi poni Sunodori. You speak English?" Izuku vaguely understood the broken Japanese but answered kindly in said language he was asked about. "Yes, I am well versed in speaking English even though I don't practice it often. Was there anything else you'd like of me?" Pony's eyes sparkled as she spoke in English, but she had a heavy southern accent that caused Izuku to really focus so he didn't mishear her. "Well, kiss me and pump a child in me. That's great. I don't got none else to talk to like this. Why don't we be friends, pals?" She gave a toothy grin as she stuck her hand out for a shake. Blinking in surprise at what he hoped to be an American expression, Izuku shook the offered hand with a smile. "Sure thing. That sounds good to me too. It'll help me practice my English and I can even help you out with Japanese if you'd like." Pony nodded vigorously, her horns almost getting close enough to cut his shirt open by how fast and hard she shook her head at the thought of getting help with something she had been struggling with. But just at that moment Miss Joke addressed the students. "Alrighty everyone, good job to those who passed and good effort for the ones who failed. You all did great, but now it's time for a short break for our sponsors. In the meantime, grab a snack, go to the bathroom, or our third option, join in on our break time game." Izuku tilted his head as he turned in Miss Joke's direction. "Game?" Miss Joke apparently felt the confusion that many like Izuku were feeling. "Yuppie doodle. Nezu has decided to add some short games in between the events to allow you all to catch your breath and entertain the crowd." Everyone understood and agreed to this. It made sense, and by the looks of it a lot of people were currently out of breath and needed a break before joining the next event. And the first game of today is Dress to Empress, so to those who choose to participate, get ready to walk the red carpet in the clothes of our design course. Izuku paled in milliseconds. "Yeah, I'm not doing that. And first place is automatically sign up. Nezu, you're a rat bastard," growled out Izuku in genuine hatred, not knowing of the hungry looks he was receiving from females in the stadium and from the woman he loved in the VIP booth. It was official. Izuku was going to skin Nezu and make his pelt into a coat for his children, or at least that is the plan running through Izuku's head as he is manhandled by the female students in charge of the dress-up game he was involuntarily participating in. Growl. Izuku's throat vibrated in irritation as a collar was thrown onto him by the tallest of the females attending to him. It wasn't actually a collar thankfully, but the suit he was wearing made him feel uncomfortable in the tight-fitting clothes. He absent-mindedly hoped May didn't make his new suit skin tight, because if it was anything like this monkey suit he was currently in, he'd have to go out in just boxer briefs instead. And yet, like his prayers were answered, it was finally done, leaving him to stand in front of a full-length mirror to allow him to see how he looked. "Damn, I clean up pretty nicely," admitted the green-haired wolfman. Smiling to himself, he took his phone out from his pocket and snapped a few pictures before sending them to his mates and mother. In response, he got a spam text from his mother, and in the group chat between his girls were various messages depicting a lot of sexual acts each girl wanted to do to him while dressed the way he was. On a wholesome note, Rumi did say between messages that he looked handsome and she expected him to wear something like this on their wedding. Causing a warm smile to tug at Izuku's lips, he absolutely loved how cute Rumi could be despite her public persona. He sent a few replies yo his mother and girls, making sure not to get them confused or else he'd never live to hear the end of it. Saying a quick thank you for the work to the girls who dressed him, Izuku left the changing room before walking to see how the others were doing. A few of his class had joined the game, those notably being Kyoka, Ochako and a girl from Class 1B by the name of Abara Shiozaki, her quirk making her have green vines for hair that had small nubs reminiscent of thorns. Checking in on the closest of his two friends, Izuku made it to Ochako's door and knocked, and after a few seconds of waiting he was allowed enter from Ochako saying a small, "Come in." Grabbing the door hand and twisting it open, the tall teen saw through the small crack of the door his brunette friend and smiled as he entered. "Hey Ochako, I was just checking in on you." Left speechless by the sight of the short-haired girl, the werewolf who cries had his mouth open at how beautiful he thought she was. "Wow." Turning to see Izuku frozen in the doorway, Ochako giggled with her blush marks growing to dust her cheeks. "Hey Izuku-kun. Y'all lookin' rather snazzy there. Real handsome if I'm being honest." Izuku nodded owlishly, not trusting his own mouth not to screw him over by saying the naughty thoughts running through his mind. The black dress Ochako was wearing was pushing all the right buttons in his head, making him gulp the excess saliva in his mouth. "You look gorgeous Ochako, it really suits you," said Izuku genuinely. His words made Ochako blush. Thanks, I'm glad you like it. I was afraid I'd look strange in such an extravagant outfit." Izuku's eyes turned warm as he smiled softly at her. "You look gorgeous in anything Ochako, don't put yourself down like that." Her cheeks burning bright, the brunette nodded meekly. They both stood in silence after this, like the awkward teens they were until they were thankfully saved by a student from the design course. The two were escorted to a quickly erected stage and were taught the very basics of a model walk. Both could feel their hearts beating as quick as Iida on a trip after eating some orange-flavored Flintstones gummies. To try and keep his nerves down, Izuku looked at the students participating in the dressing game. Izuku was actually pretty impressed by the looks of his fellow students, but none more than the two girls from Class 1B. The vine-haired girl, Abara Shiozaki, wore a blackish-green dress with a veil over her head, making her look like a gothic bride. The green-haired girl must have felt his gaze because she turned in his direction and they both locked eyes for a moment, her black eyes looking into his green. After a few moments that felt like minutes, the girl turned away with a red hue to her cheeks, making Izuku smile on the inside, knowing he may have another admirer to look out for in the future. It was then, however, that Izuku's eyes went towards the vine girl's companion who stood next to her. The shorter girl was Izuku's new acquaintance Pony, who was sporting quite the outfit. Pony was wearing a winter-themed dress, with various accessories to pull off the theme of her outfit. Izuku found that she was very cute-looking, and the sparkle in her animated blue eyes as she talked to the vine girl pulled his attention to her like a magnet. Pony apparently saw him from all the way from the other side of the backstage area and quickly ran over to him, pulling the green-haired girl while doing so. "Izuku, you look amazing," yelled the blonde excitedly. Chuckling to himself, Izuku patted the young woman on the head and replied, "Thanks Tsunotori-chan, you and your friend look lovely as well." Pony blushed with a big smile, her eyes closing happily as her tail wagged behind her. The green-haired vine user beside her blushed as well. As a devoted Christian, she understood English and Latin to worship her Lord no matter the language of the Bible she found herself with. Izuku turned to the taller of the two and held out his hand. "I'm Izuku Midoriya, it's nice to meet you." Taking his hand, the Christian girl gave her name. "I am Abara Shiozaki, it is a pleasure to be at your acquaintance Midoriya-san." Lifting her hand to meet his lips, Izuku looked into her surprised onyx eyes and spoke in a husky tone. "The pleasure is all mine, my dear." The reason behind such intense action out of seemingly nowhere is due to Izuku's lust becoming hard to handle with three women in close proximity, who were all emitting lustful pheromones to his keen senses. Yes, even Abara, due to the fact she finds Izuku handsome and her body is acting accordingly to her emotions. Turning completely red, Abara nodded stiffly. I see you are a gentleman with a silver tongue. I would stop before you make a fool of yourself. I am a woman of God and your sweet words will not sway me from the Lord's path." Smiling with his eyes turning blue and slitted like a cat's, Izuku leaned forward into her personal space. "Oh, and here I was thinking we can marry and have children. But you were thinking I wanted to skip ahead. What a naughty mind you have, Abara-chan." Her whole body turning red, Abara stammered. "I am not. I was simply concluding that you are a womanizer due to your words. It was a perfectly normal line of thought. I am not a dirty-minded heathen." Smirking at her cute response, the wolfman chuckled. My dear, it is very alright. I am having a hard time getting my actions under control when near beauties like you three, so I am sorry if I gave off the wrong impression. Ochako, Pony and Ibara blushed deeply at this, and as the three tried to speak, Izuku was tapped on the shoulder. Turning, he and the girls looked to see Miss Joke with a grin. Hey wolf boy, I gotta let you know that you'll be having 2 outfits, so once you're done being on stage for your first part, come backstage and get into your second outfit. Groaning, Izuku's head dropped. Do I have to? Miss Joke cackled and wiped a tear from her eye. Oh absolutely. Nezu already told me that this game is already becoming a UA tradition after this, and the media is anticipating you being out there, so no backing out now kid. Sighing, Izuku nodded and turned to the girls. Pony and Ochako looked at him with smug looks while Ibara would meet his gaze, before turning away and doing the process over again. To Izuku's credit, he didn't let their looks bother him. Instead, he wondered how his mom was doing. With Inko in the VIP box, the green-haired woman sighed to herself, mimicking what her son had done moments before without knowing it. She had her phone in hand and smiled down at the image of her handsome boy. She was so proud of him, and even more so for finding such wonderful woman. Fuck. How is he so damn hot? Yelled the rabbit heroine known as Mirko. Okay, so maybe some of them were a little quirky here and there. She couldn't exactly blame them for it. Pregnancy hormones were no joke after all. But right as Inko thought this, the rich girl of her boy's harem yelled just as loudly as Mirko had. If I wasn't pregnant already, I would chain him up and have him breed me until I was. Were all of Izuku's girls like this? Was the main thought going through Inko's mind and pretty much the entire room besides Izuku's girls. This was answered when Nomori started having a nosebleed that just wouldn't stop as she wrote furiously into her phone, giggling like a pervert while doing it. And next to her was the much taller Ryuko, who had formed horns and scales throughout her body, her pregnancy making her turn into her dragon form slowly to accommodate for the egg forming inside her. Ryuko herself was breathing heavily, a black smoke coming out of her nostrils with each huff of breath she released, and her eyes were slits that bored dangerously into the phone in her scaled hands. So all of my daughters-in-law are giant pervs for my son. Well, it could be worse. At least Izuku hasn't gotten with a villain or a married woman. Unbeknownst to Inko, the others in the room shivered at the idea she had now planted in their heads. All might hope to God his successor never met All for One. His heart couldn't take it if young Midoriya got her pregnant. Kami, please watch over young Midoriya and make it so he never, ever gets in the hands of All for One or some crazy yandere girl. Both would be extremely bad, but the first is probably worse. Prayed the #1 hero mentally. Meanwhile, the male pro heroes in the booth wondered if Midoriya would try getting with any of his classmates' mothers. The thought itself was ridiculous, but at this point anything could happen. Time skip. Miss Joke walked onto the modeling stage and spoke towards the crowd. What's good, my cuckle fucks and Chad bastards? It's your girl Miss Joke back at it again with the first game of the sports festival. Many cheers rang out, while some mothers in the stands booed at the green-haired woman. Aizawa in the commentary booth sighed in defeat while Mike just laughed like an idiot. Miss Joke, however, didn't miss a beat as she addressed her audience. Alright you guys, gals and everything in between. We have dressed to impress for our first game today, so with that being said, let's get this show on the road. Waving her arm to the curtain, she explained, the first style of clothes are formal Thursday. Students walked out in suits, dresses and many other types of formal clothing, and near the end coming out with their arms locked were Izuku, Ochako and a blushing Ibara. The three getting many claps and cheers for how well they looked in their outfits, making them smile at how much people seemed to like how they looked. Even the shy Ibara smiled and waved to the crowd, causing even more cheers as they loved the way the girl presented herself as a shy princess type. A few more came out before they were ushered back behind the curtain, where Izuku was unceremoniously dragged off by a tall girl in glasses and a wide grin. Leaving Ochako and Ibara to watch on as the 7-foot-tall man was manhandled by a girl barely up to his shoulders. It was actually pretty funny to watch, causing Ochako to snort in an unladylike way. A quick change into a different suit made Izuku blush deeply and stammer at what he was wearing, mostly to the fact of what was on his left hand than the actual suit. Why am I wearing a wedding suit? And why am I wearing a wedding ring? Exclaimed the werewolf in bewilderment. The glasses-wearing girl who helped him get dressed just shrugged. One of the participants asked for you specifically to be part of her outfit pairing. You're the would-be husband and she is your bride. Good luck, stud. Call me if you need to let off some steam. She stuffed his pocket with a piece of paper, obviously her phone number, as she kissed his cheek and left the room to go help elsewhere. Am I a harem protagonist like from those games Mineta made me play? Duh, and you're also a himbo. The ethereal voice said, causing Izuku to look around to see that he was completely alone. Nana, that isn't funny. Pouted Izuku once he figured out what had happened and who had done it. Giggling in his mind, Nana retorted, "Aw, come on, lighten up. So you're basically living the life of a harem protagonist, except you actually get laid. What's the problem with that?" Sighing and rubbing his face, Izuku answered, "Oh, I don't know, maybe the fact I'll probably be a dad of 100 children by the time I'm out of UA. Or the fact if I am a protagonist from those types of games, doesn't that mean most antagonists will end up sleeping with me?" A long pause as the same thought Toshinori had formed in Nana's head, along with the rest of the past users who immediately started screaming, breaking objects, and from what Izuku was hearing, started a fire. Grumbling to himself, Izuku cut the link to the past users and took another picture of himself, but this time he decided to not send it to his girls and mom and instead keep it as a surprise for when he walked out. Izuku left the changing room shortly after taking the picture and walked towards the backstage, where he was met with Abara, Pony and Ochako once again. Each girl blushed crimson upon seeing him, but none worse than Abara, who remembered what Izuku has said before about dating, and then getting married before having kids. Waving to them, Izuku greeted, "Yo, did I miss Pony going out?" Pony nodded. "It's fine, I was a little anxious at first, but besides that it was kinda boring." Nodding to himself, Izuku patted her head again on reflex. "Sorry, I wish I could have cheered you on. You look beautiful, so I bet you got lots of cheers from the guys in the stands." Giggling to herself, Pony and boasted sarcastically, "Yup. This gal has a charm only matched by the prettiest of women. I got all the hootin' and hollerin' when I'm on stage." Abara and Izuku laughed. They both enjoyed the American girl's joke. Ochako, who didn't know English, just smiled, trying to not feel awkward. The group continued to talk for a bit until it was time for Izuku and his partner to head out on stage, only to find out Izuku had Yo go out first and wait for his partner. Miss Joke's energetic voice boomed through the stadium. "Lastly, we have the last category. This style is well known as the Vegas Wedding Edition. So eat your heart outs, the ladies who still can't find a man after 30, because this is everything you dreamed of and more." Izuku walked out in his suit. The stadium went quiet. It made Izuku sweat nervously until something smacked him in the face. It glided off and into his hand that on instinct caught it. Looking down at what he held, Izuku blushed crimson as he realized that he was holding a pair of panties. From the stands, the familiar face of one mound lady rang out. She was in casual attire due to being one of the undercover heroes patrolling for the event. "Marry me, you fucking hunk." Izuku's neon pink face was shown through the stadium as more and more women stood up and shouted that they wanted to marry him as well. Those who were as brazen as Mount Lady threw bras and panties at the poor himbo, who by the time they were stopped by security was now standing in a pile of women's undergarments. Standing a few feet from him, Miss Joke cackled like a wicked witch as she commented, "Who would think something like this would happen at the US Sports Festival? I bet this will go down in the history books for the most wild and entertaining one of all time." Izuku couldn't really digest the lime-haired woman's words as he plucked the bras off his shoulders and one pair of red silk lingerie underwear off his head. No one seemed to have noticed, not even Izuku himself, that he put Mount Lady's panties in his pocket as he moved on autopilot. The stage crew came out and helped take the undergarments to the lost and found, where a lot of single women and some not-so-single women would go and collected their clothes after the event was over. But for now Izuku was stuck standing in front of the crowd. His nerves started to strain again until music started to play. Not just any music, mind you, but the actual music used in American-style weddings when the bride walks down the aisle. And once Izuku made that connection, his eyes went wide in shock. Turning to face the backstage area where he had walked out from, his eyes were glued to the figure underneath the newly strewn-up white archway with frilly fabric hanging from it. The feminine figure walked with a bouquet of flowers, ranging from a vast majority of purple flowers with some black and white ones mixed in. Walking towards him on beat with the music was a stunning woman. Her short hair was covered by the veil she was wearing but did nothing in hiding the obviously familiar earphone jacks Izuku was well accustomed to. And as if the moment of her walking zipped by, Kyoko now stood in front of him, and all Izuku could do was gawk in surprise at her outfit and how amazing she looked in it. Kyoko must have noticed as she snorted in an unladylike fashion and commented on his apparent bout of stunned silence, "You good there, future hubby? You do know you're supposed to lift my veil by now, right?" Blinking repeatedly and closing his mouth, Izuku gulped while stepping forward, his hands hesitant as they reached out and tentatively lifting the thin, almost see-through fabric. Once again he was at a loss for words at what laid underneath the veil, her purplish-black lipstick matching her beautiful hair, and the dark eyeliner made her look 10 times more gorgeous than she already was in his opinion. "Wow, you look stunning," stated Izuku full of honesty. Smiling wide with her cheeks reddening, Kyoko replied, "Thanks for the compliments, big guy, you look pretty damn good yourself. Might just have to start the honeymoon early." She finished her sentence with a wink, causing Izuku to blush deeply and smile awkwardly at how forward she was. He kinda liked it. But before they could flirt or compliment each other further, Miss Joke walked out in a genuine-looking priest outfit, much to the two's confusion. The green-haired woman smiled cheekily and spoke up with her very much real Bible in hand. "Sup you two, wanna get this impromptu segment on the way, or do you two need to flirt a bit longer?" Giggling to herself, Kyoko wrapped her arm around Izuku's and looked to the pro-heroine. "I think we're ready to start, so let's get this wedding started. I want some alone time with my future hubby." Blinking a few times, confusion evident on his features, Izuku wasn't sure what they meant. This was just a joke outfit segment. "Right." Clearing her throat, Miss Joke spoke in a professional manner. She went on to officiate the wedding in perfect detail, much to Izuku's and even Kyoko's surprise. Miss Joke even had them say their vows, which was surreal, but Izuku did what he usually did and spoke from his heart. "Kyoko, I haven't known you that long, almost 4 months actually. But even so, I have seen you bloom into a wonderfully strong woman with an even stronger heart. I honestly can't believe you'd agree to be with someone like me. You're just so perfect, it's hard for me to think you'd pick me over anyone else. Your beauty is divine, your voice from the times I have caught you singing is that of an angel, and your smile is so bright with warmth that I hope to match it one day. I love you, Kyoko Jiro. God, you're cheesy, but that's what I like about you. Ya lovable dork," Kyoko said with tears prickling her eyes, his words warming her heart and making her already formed feelings for the teen grow even more. Sniffing and dabbing her eye, making sure not to wipe them as not to make sure she didn't ruin her makeup, Kyoko said her vows. "Izuku Midoriya, you are the best man I could ever ask for. I can't believe you'd actually think yourself not worth of me. I'd say that should be the other way around due to how awesome you are. Your heart is made of gold. You always help everyone around you despite your awkwardness is something I admire. Your strength and drive to be the best hero you can be is honestly inspiring. And if that wasn't all, you're a dork that I find hot and sexy, even with you being a major nerd that has more hero merch than actual personal items. And I love you too, you big fur ball." After those tearful confessions of love towards one another, the next part was Izuku putting the ring on Kyoko and her giving him his, but obviously they didn't have rings since this was supposed to be a joke segment. Luckily for them, Izuku had a rich cat girl in his pack of lovers, so with a loud bang a ball shot right into Izuku's hand as he caught the projectile without thinking. Using his amazing eyesight, Izuku turned and saw the heavily pregnant form of Momo standing at the side door of the VIP room with a grenade launcher in her grasp. Next thing he knew, Momo created a banner saying, "Open the capsule." Curiously, Izuku did just that. Trusting his first mate completely, he was surprised to see the capsule open to reveal an engagement box with 2 gorgeous wedding bands. With a quick and quiet thank you in Momo's direction, Izuku put the wedding band on Kyoko's dainty finger and she returned the favor by placing the gold band with a wolf's head on his much larger finger. Miss Joke smiled at them gently and said the usual, "Do you take this man, woman?" part, which Izuku and Kyoko obviously said they do. With a loud cheer from the crowd, Miss Joke instructed them to kiss. It was awkward at first as Izuku stammered out a few words, but with a forceful tug on his tie from Kyoko, she brought his lips to hers in a way that made women in the crowd squeal in awe at the power couple they were seeing form in front of them. Leaning into the embrace Izuku had initiated during the kiss, Kyoko whispered so the microphones on their clothes couldn't hear, "You better pick me up and take me to somewhere private, hun. Your wife needs to get her some sugar, if you catch my drift." Blushing once again from the tomboy in a wedding dress, Izuku's eyes turned blue with his primal side expressing its lust. Izuku did just as he was told, and by picking her up bridal style before he started walking off into the back of the stage. He ignored the cheers and whistles but did stop to let Kyoka throw the bouquet to the crowd of girls on the side of the stage. Izuku watched the bundle of flowers soar in the air until it landed in the surprised hands of one Abara Shiozaki. Izuku and Abara made eye contact as the maiden blushed profusely. Pony, who was by her side, spoke animatedly to her about how lucky she was. Inside the green vine-haired girl's mind, the image of her and the teen wolf at their own wedding played without pause, causing her to blush even more and start pray quietly to herself. That was until Pony dragged her off to get changed for the next event, which would start in an hour. Izuku trailing his eyes on them as they disappeared behind some curtains, the image of the two staying in his mind as he growled lowly. But Kyoka quickly grabbed his attention with a kiss to his nose and guided him with directions until they entered an empty room, which her jacks quickly locked with a swift motion, causing a loud clicking sound to ring out in the empty space. Looking up into Izuku's glowing blue eyes full of yearning, Kyoka grinned. "Now that we have some privacy, how about you get to undressing me physically and not just with those nice eyes of yours?" With her consent given, Izuku pounced, Kyoka giggling all the while, even as his claws tore open the dress to reveal her pale skin, which he greedily placed his lips on, leaving behind hickeys in his wake. Safe to say Izuku was going to fill one of, if not many, bets the girls in the VIP room had made, and with a bit of his luck he'd probably get another girl by the time lunch came around. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and now we will see you in the next video.